Around 3 million years ago, when the first human tribes started appearing on Earth, our main character was among them, Pele Nazar, an Austropex hunter who, at first glance, seemed completely ordinary. But there was just something off about him, a weird vibe that made him stand out from everyone. His obsession with hunting was on a whole different level. Back then, he still thought he was just like everyone around him. Until, little by little, he realized something was seriously wrong with him. While the people around him grew old, weakened, and eventually died, he didn't. No disease, no accident, no wild animal attack. Nothing could hurt him. Time kept moving. Generations rose and fell, but he stayed exactly the same. No, not the same. He changed. His body kept growing. Each era, he became more muscular and powerful in this endless time. Hunting, fighting, and taking on any opponent worthy of him became the only purpose of his existence. The curse of immortality and the pain of loneliness were his only real companions. And weirdly enough, they were the only things that gave him a twisted kind of comfort. For nearly 3 million years, he lived like that. Every single day, his body evolved in some new way. His strength shot up to a completely different level. One day, he got so strong that literally no one could match him. People started calling him the god of Earth. His power became so overwhelming that he crushed all the other gods and claimed the title of the most powerful being in the divine realm. And that's where everything started to change. From then on, my world flipped. Everything fell apart. The very things that used to be full of thrill and excitement before, now they turned boring as hell. My brain just snapped. So one day I grabbed the whole divine realm and smashed it into the ground. The divine realm, which was like a miniature planet, shook with its full weight. And that was just the beginning. The divine realm quaked. Every god, every angel, and even the demons hiding in that realm were scared out of their minds. This wasn't the first time I'd pulled a stunt like that, but by now, some gods were seriously fed up with these daily tremors. One of them was Lucifer, the second most powerful god in the divine realm. By this point, I was drowning in boredom, acting like I didn't care at all about the destruction I was causing. My mind was stuck on just one thought. I defeated every worthy opponent without even trying. And now it had been over 1,000 years since anyone had truly challenged me. Now my heart craved someone who could give me a reason to fight again. Letting out a deep sigh, I muttered under my breath, "Being too strong is also a problem, man." The moment those words left my mouth, something clicked in my head. After 1,000 years of nonstop frustration, it suddenly felt like I'd had some kind of genius-level breakthrough. If his strength was his problem, then the solution was right in front of him. He just had to find a way to make himself weaker. To him, it was totally obvious. If he could get a weak body like the humans on Earth, he'd instantly have hundreds of rivals to fight. Suddenly, I jumped up from my seat and shouted loudly, "Dragonlane, come here!" A massive dragon, Arsman Sajira al-Zamin, came crash-landing down from the top god's throne. He looked at least 5 times taller than Belinazad. Main grumpy, Legreta Jesse, Yahan Bolayana, Galaho Paramasha, Izahi Diktahi. Those glowing eyes made it obvious who he was. The top god's right-hand man. Dragonlane's attitude flipped in a heartbeat, and with a deep growl, he demanded to know why he'd been called. MU, meanwhile, was totally unfazed. He just started walking off like it was no big deal and said calmly, "Handle everything after I'm gone, okay?" But things didn't go as smoothly as MU had pictured. Out of nowhere, the dragon pulled a wild stunt and cast an absolute binding spell, trying to lock down God MU and stop him from leaving. But the moment MU turned his head and shot him a single furious side glance, everything changed. The dragon's fierce, wild swagger evaporated on the spot. Suddenly, he looked terrified and embarrassed. Stammering, he tried to explain himself, insisting he never meant any disrespect, but MU felt he at least owed him some kind of explanation, especially with an important god's meeting about to begin. MU, however, couldn't care less about that meeting. Without a word, he started walking again, dragging the chain dragon along like it weighed nothing. When his first move failed, Lean instantly switched tactics and played the victim, looking like he was about to burst into tears. He warned that if MU bailed on the meeting, He, Garlic Galash, and Yusi Pegarega would be stuck listening to the other gods' endless whining. Mu ripped through the binding spell like it was nothing, like brushing away a cobweb, then spun toward the dragon and shouted, "I'm leaving! If you really want to stop me, then be ready to fight me right now." The moment he said that, Lin's whole attitude flipped. He instantly realized that putting up with the other gods' tantrums was way easier than going head-to-head with God Mu. He joined his hands and played it safe. "Have a smooth trip, sir. Hope it's quick and calm." Mu gave a faint smile and walked over to where a floating mini version of Earth was hovering. He stretched out his hand and tapped that tiny Earth. A question bubbled up from the magma of his thoughts. Whose body should I enter now? To make the decision easier, he started scrolling through people on Earth. Prayers or messages? He listened. Most of them were dumb, useless, and boring. But then one message grabbed his attention completely. That message hit him so hard it made his whole existence feel like a joke. At first, he felt a bit annoyed. But then he quickly realized this was exactly the human whose body he could enter and restart his journey. For the first time in 1,000 years, Mu actually felt real excitement. He had finally found the ultimate solution to his endless boredom. But while Mu was over the moon with his strategy, his assistant didn't look even half as thrilled. For a few seconds, Mu wondered if he should give some kind of explanation before leaving. But staying true to his full Sigma personality attitude, he decided there was no need to explain anything. The dragon was a bit confused and shocked when Mu casually said goodbye, dumped everything into his hands, and told him to handle whatever came up during his never-ending absence. In the dragon's heart, a strange mix of worry and disappointment was brewing. He finally realized that Mu was sending his soul down to Earth and leaving his body behind in the divine realm. Panicking, the dragon tried to warn him that if anything happened to his body, then his separated soul on Earth would also die. But Mu's mind was already made up. He was absolutely sure no one up there would even think about touching his body. Who would dare? That was his whole vibe. With that same cocky confidence, he was sure his body would be perfectly safe. The dragon tried to stop him, but only with words. But Mu, as always, completely ignored his assistant's warnings, and that was exactly what hurt the most. Without any further explanation, the scene instantly switched. He wasn't Mu anymore. He was a new human, a guy who had just won an intense battle and defeated a demon lord. Itna, Krezita Hushilimit, Kroska Chukiti. But none of it was real. Use. It was all inside a video game called Last Scene Tie, a game that a 17-year-old loser had just finished a few moments ago, and his name was Liho, a dude burning with envy for every damn game protagonist alive. Those lucky bastards who get insane adventures and always end up with a massive harem of cute girls. Credits roll. Meanwhile, Liho Nilan Bisan's Chadi Cash Husky Life. Kapadbi Zahoda, WSK Hearts of Phone Fisalgaya. It slipped from his hand and dropped from a great height. Seconds later, the phone hit the ground and shattered. Now it made sense why Lee was on that 3-story ledge. He had nothing left to live for. He was about to end it. His body was giving out, covered in wounds from head to toe. He whispered a bitter farewell to this cruel, unjust world and jumped. As he plummeted, the wind howled past him, tears turning his vision into a blur. Lee shouted that if any god out there really existed, this was their chance to prove it by giving him another world. But before any prayer could be answered, he hit the ground. Blood sprayed everywhere. His skull smashed straight into the pavement. By all rights, Lee should have died right there. Yet something was off. Lee's fingers twitched, his ribs cracked, and he suddenly dragged in a deep breath. Like a man hauled up from the depths with no idea why, a god had seized his ruined body in an instant, forcing his silent soul to endure every shred of that agony without the faintest idea what had actually happened. Meanwhile, Lee's soul had already arrived in the divine realm. He just stood there, completely stunned, his jaw practically on the floor. He was in the human world. The real shock hit when he saw a gigantic dragon standing right in front of him, and it clearly didn't look happy. But Lee wasn't the only one stunned. The dragon was just as shaken. It hadn't expected to see a human soul in the dragon realm this soon. Just like Lee had never imagined that the very first thing he'd see after his death would be the blazing eyes of an angry-looking dragon. Now let's rewind 1 second. 10 seconds before this chaos, God Mu was standing there with his iconic smirk. His hand rested on the mini-earth, relaxed and confident. Abner Divine Sharir Kochornabar was a Bilkul Pashtavanahita. The dragling had tried its best to warn him, begged him to reconsider, but as always, he was reckless as hell. He shrugged off every warning like it was dust. Without wasting even a second, he sent his soul to Earth and directly swapped it with Leo's soul. And just like that, Destiny started writing a brand new story. What happened in the very next moment was beyond anyone's imagination. The instant Mu's soul entered Lee's body, he realized he was trapped in a deadly, no-way-out situation. No time, no chance to adjust, no warning. He was already in midair, plummeting at lightning speed with less than a second to figure out what was about to happen. And then it happened. Lee's body hit the ground with such brutal force that it was hard to believe any human could survive that kind of impact. It wasn't just a crash, it was complete annihilation. Bones were smashed into dust. The body bounced up like a broken rag doll and then crashed back down, utterly lifeless. Jotori Bahat's sensation, Bajiti Wobi Muki Puri Immortal Lafki Kisabi Duts Yadadi. But the real shock wasn't that. The shock was the confusion. Why? The moment he set foot on Earth, the instant his soul arrived. How did it turn into this? How did it all spiral this fast? He just couldn't process it. His hands were shaking. The borrowed body was in shock. Then suddenly, everything went quiet. His hands stopped. In that cold, dead silence, a horrifying realization hit him. He was dying. No way to rewrite fate, no time to fix things. In the next instant, his body slammed into the cold ground. Everything was eerily quiet. There was no one around to witness the fall of that once proud and powerful god. No one to help. No one even to watch. But no, this wasn't MU's end. Not yet. As you know, there are some muscles in the human body you can't control consciously, like the heart and certain internal organs. But MU, who had spent 300 million years training his body, had long surpassed anything a human body was supposed to do. His control was so precise, he could move his blood vessels, muscles, and organs at will. That's why, in just a few seconds, his heart started beating again. Yes, it hurt like hell, but MU forcefully pushed blood through his veins, patched up his heart, and stopped the bleeding. Slowly, MU stood up again, as if nothing had happened. Even though the body was still screaming in pain, he didn't get angry. He was strangely pleased, battered, bruised, drenched in blood. He hadn't felt something this intense in a very long time, and that feeling alone was enough to convince him. He'd made the right choice coming here. Now it was time to dig into Lee's memories, to see what kind of life this boy had lived. MU didn't take long to piece the whole story together, and once he did, he decided to head to Lee's house, his new base. But getting there was a problem. With Lee's weak, injured legs, even walking felt like a challenge. So MU literally dropped down and started using his hands, crawling like a monkey just to keep his balance. Eventually, after a while, he did manage to make it to Lee's house. The first thing he noticed was a pile of cat poop right in front of the window. Great welcome! The house itself was tiny, almost like a basement. MU sat down on the squeaky bed and began sifting through Lee's memories. From those memories, he realized Lee had just one male relative, and that guy lived far, far away. In other words, Lee was completely alone, poor, helpless, utterly pathetic. His only job was going to school. That was the bit MU found most interesting, especially when he hit on one school memory. A boy who bullied Lee day and night, as if tormenting him was his life's purpose. Constant fights, humiliation, relentless torture. For MU, this was a pure, perfect starting point, packed with pain and potential. He couldn't have been more thrilled. MU threw a casual punch into the air, and suddenly a sharp, stabbing pain ripped through his hand, as if the muscles had torn. Something was definitely off. He figured he'd probably overworked the arm muscles crawling all the way here. Clearly, this body wasn't built for any real physical action. MU realized Lee had probably never used his hands for real physical work, which was why even simple movements hurt. But MU didn't get angry. If anything, he was glad to feel this kind of pain again after thousands of years. It was strangely satisfying. The next day, the police found bloodstains and shattered glass at the spot where Lee's body had fallen. They quickly cordoned off the area and launched an investigation. Meanwhile, MU casually strolled back to the crash site, but not to watch the police at work. The real reason was that right next to the crash site stood that 3-story building, Lee's school, and MU had already decided he would carry on Lee's daily routine. As soon as he stepped into the school, he started scanning the corridors until he found Lee's classroom. The moment MU spotted Lee's classroom, he got so hyped that he yanked the sliding rail door open with a loud scrape. The door bounced back and smacked him square in the face. Hard. The whole triumphant moment was instantly ruined. Swaying a little, MU walked into the classroom, muttering to himself, and his entrance caught the attention of one of Lee's classmates. Annoyed by the mumbling, the boy shot him an angry glare and snapped, idiotically, "At least try coming in quietly." The second he heard that, MU forgot all about the pain and headed straight toward the boy. In that instant, God MU's mind went razor sharp. This was the same bully who kept popping up in Lee's memories, the one who had always made his life hell. But the bully still had no clue that the Lee standing in front of him was no longer the same Lee. The bully sneered. "Kya ha? Chashma bhul gaya, ye bibi kufi di khane ka plan hai." Before MU could say a word, the boy suddenly swung a punch straight into MU's face. The punch landed so clean and hard that blood started pouring from MU's nose and lips, dripping onto the floor. With a mocking laugh, the bully jeered again. "What? Sold your specs for cash or lost them again? Like you always do, loser." But MU didn't even flinch. He just stood there, completely calm. He had his own rules for what counted as a fair, honorable fight. A fight only truly began when both sides clearly meant it, and he always let the first blow land on himself to confirm the other guy's intent. Now that the punch had connected, that familiar smile crept across MU's face. Without missing a beat, he cut the bully off and drove a heavy punch straight into him. The kid never saw it coming. The punch landed with the same force MU had just taken himself. But the moment MU pulled his hand back, a sharp pain ripped through his arm, like his muscles were being torn apart. It was a harsh reminder that this wasn't a god's body anymore, just a frail human one. Hearing the uproar, the teacher burst into the classroom, yelling furiously for them to stop fighting right now. But by then, every single eye in the room was locked on the brawl. For the first time in his life, the bully had taken a punch from a nerd, and his ego took the hit harder than his face. Blinded by rage, he charged straight at MU's face, completely ignoring the teacher and the crowd of students. MU instantly switched to defense and managed to block most of the blows. In the back of his mind, he was thinking, if I had my real body, this would have been over ages ago. He tried to trigger his god powers, but nothing happened. That realization threw him off, and in the very next second, he took another punch. It didn't hurt much, but the bully kept swinging like he wouldn't stop till MU paid for it. Meanwhile, MU realized this was real now. His punches missed. His kicks did nothing. BSL, our god powers pedokade Chuki. He was down to one last option. All of a sudden, MU dipped his head, lined up a precise spot, and took the incoming punch straight on his skull. His skull was the only part of this body he could halfway trust. The instant the bully's fist crashed into MU's head, the impact was so vicious, his fingers snapped. The pain was so intense that the bully screamed like a crying child. Inside, MU felt like a genius. To finish the fight, he took advantage of the bully's distraction. This time, MU was the one who stepped forward. Grabbing his hand, I suddenly smashed a brutal headbutt into him, right in the stomach, or maybe the balls, and Bolly went straight into shock. The pain was so intense he couldn't even pull himself together. But Moon didn't stop there. With a single jerk, he yanked him up and slammed a deadly headbutt into the bully's jaw. This time, his eyes rolled back completely. His whole body went limp, and he passed out cold. The whole class freaked out. Everyone whipped out their phones and started recording the entire fight. The boy everyone thought was the weakest had just taken down the biggest bully in school. No one had ever even imagined that. But for Moon, this was something else entirely. For the first time in thousands of years, he'd fought someone using his full strength, and the whole experience felt unreal. This wasn't a moment to celebrate. The moment he stopped, every injury on his body started screaming at once. His mouth flooded with that metallic blood taste, and for the first time he realized maybe tanking all this wasn't going to be so easy. It took Moon only a moment to realize that what had just happened was, surprisingly, something he actually enjoyed. After a long, exhausting journey, feeling real pain in a real fight was strangely satisfying. Once the rush died down, Moon kept staring at the boy's unconscious body, like he still wasn't finished yet. Maybe the fear had faded. Maybe because he'd already shut him down. Moon softly said, "Thanks." But then something unexpected happened. Moon bent down, opened his mouth wide, and tore off the boy's ear. Blood sprayed everywhere, and Moon didn't just bite. He literally ripped off a small piece of the ear and spat it onto the floor, right in front of everyone. Panic exploded in the classroom, right there in front of the entire class. No one could believe that Moon had actually done that. To everyone, he suddenly looked like a complete psycho. But Moon didn't care about anyone. He stayed perfectly calm, wiped the blood from his face, and kept staring, unblinking, at that same boy who still hadn't regained consciousness. Biting off the bully's ear was Moon's own twisted way of saying thanks, of leaving his mark in his own style. Anyone who gave him a fun fight got added to Moon's list. Humans were playthings, but this wasn't some kind of humiliation. It was recognition, and earning this title was like a badge of honor. Ironically, it was kind of like how humans neuter an animal before putting it on the market. The only difference was that Moon's way wasn't about humiliation. It was about showing respect and power. Soon, the story spread through the whole school like wildfire. The biggest bully in second year had been beaten by the weakest boy in the school, and beaten so badly that emergency medical help had to be called. Moon, like everyone else, watched the ambulance arrive and was genuinely impressed. He was impressed that help had shown up so fast, just from a single phone call. As the ambulance left, Moon waved his hand in the air, as if saying goodbye to his first opponent, silently wishing they'd meet again someday. Just then, a teacher came up from behind. Seething with anger, he said to Moon, "Come to the office." The moment they reached the office, he exploded. Shouting, he asked, "Have you lost your mind? Why did you pull this wild, crazy stunt with your classmate?" In a fit of rage, the teacher picked up the file in his hand to hit him, but Moon didn't flinch at all. No fear, no regret, just a faint blush and a spark of excitement on his face. Just as he was about to land his next opponent, the teacher's hand stopped in midair. His hand froze there. He didn't want to risk ending up like the boy who'd just been taken to the hospital. He held back and only said, "Bring your parents tomorrow." Moon had been sure the teacher was going to hit him and then the fight would start. But when nothing like that happened, he dropped the idea of a fight and quietly walked out. The teacher gave him permission to leave school before the other kids. Without saying much, Moon followed the instructions and headed out toward Lee's house. On the way, his mind kept drifting. Unlike the other gods, Moon didn't have full knowledge of this world. He couldn't even figure out what leaving early was supposed to mean, whether it was a signal to return to base or something else entirely. Moon decided he'd use this free time to heal and train his body because he had more fights waiting for him in the future. His arm was still trembling with pain. He tried to use mana again. That divine energy which, in countless worlds, is called ki or chakra, the life force flowing through all of nature, the power that gives humans their superhuman abilities. In some worlds, it turns them into hunters, and others into wizards or gamers. But in this world, no matter how hard he tried, Moon couldn't rely on mana at all. He tried again, and again the mana fizzled out in just a few seconds. He recalled that earlier fight when his mana had just cut out on him. Now his frustration was boiling over. Moon realized that from here on out, he'd have to rely solely on his physical body, his one and only remaining strength. The moment he reached Lee's house, Moon collapsed straight onto the bed. He knew recovery would take a long time, and there was nothing he could do about it. So he decided to return to the god's realm for a while to see what was happening there. The instant he left Earth, his soul slipped back into his original god body. But as soon as Moon regained consciousness, a shocking scene was waiting for him. Lee was strangling a dragon link, that same weak boy who was always bullied on Earth. Now he was suddenly brimming with confidence. The moment he saw Moon, he released the dragon and walked up to him, demanding, "Give me that dragon." Lee had no idea who Moon really was. He assumed this was just some random soul that had wandered into this realm for a bit and would soon be gone. Now Lee wanted to use that dragon link to seize control over his new life. Moon absolutely despised how arrogant and bossy Lee was becoming. Without a moment's hesitation, Moon summoned a godly hand and clamped it around Lee. He made it crystal clear that you don't talk to a lord like that, barking out orders. Lee was completely stunned. He had never imagined anything like this. But Moon couldn't care less about his protests or complaints, and without a second thought, he started dragging him off somewhere else. Moon had never before personally dragged any boy to another world. But from the look on Lee's face, it was obvious something completely different was going on in his head. In just a short while, they reached the domain of the second-ranked god among the divine, Lucifer. Moon strode in like he owned the place, each calm step spelling out exactly why he was there. There was no one else there, only Lucifer. Unlike other gods who sit guarding their planets from afar, Moon marched straight into Lucifer's domain. He treated Lucifer with the same respect you'd give an ordinary human. Naturally, Lucifer was not pleased with Moon's rude behavior. Moon didn't even give him a chance to speak. But Moon couldn't care less about what Lucifer thought. He bluntly told him to open the gate because he was going to send Lee to the planet Elma. As expected, Lucifer reminded him that Elma wasn't his planet, so Moon had no right to interfere. But Moon wasn't the type to back down. He leaned in a little and reminded Lucifer which god actually held more power here. He made it clear he could do whatever he wanted, and to drive his point in even deeper, Moon added, "If you doubt my strength, I'm ready to prove it anytime, anywhere." Poor Lucifer knew he was no match for Moon, and he started trembling with frustration. Seeing Lucifer hesitate, Moon decided to take matters into his own hands. He moved toward the surface of planet Elma, and the moment he touched it, Lucifer jolted and quickly warned him that interfering in another god's domain was strictly forbidden. If an outsider god touched it, an unbreakable barrier would activate. And that's exactly what happened. The instant Moon touched it, a powerful barrier formed in front of him. But Lucifer's disbelief knew no limits when Moon shattered it effortlessly in just a few seconds, something Lucifer had never even imagined. Drowning in shock, Lucifer just stared at Moon, and Moon said that the rules of the universe only change when someone truly wants to change them. Then Moon opened his divine hand and released Lee. He pushed him to move forward and jump into the hole that had been opened into planet Elmer. Lee hesitated, clearly terrified. "Yusko yat delaba, yehidu hamisha manga, ab unka tere samne hai." Lee again asked Moon, "Give me the dragon link so I can dominate my new life." But Moon made it clear he had no intention of giving up his assistant and simply shot Lee straight into planet Elma. After that, Moon thoda rukar socha aaj kal ke bache sab kuch silver platter pe chahiye mehnat karna nahi chahte. Now that everything was settled, Moon casually glanced at Lucifer and said, "Take care of the kid," and then left. Meanwhile, Lucifer was burning with humiliation and rage, thinking only one thing: if only he had the strength to tear Moon into pieces. Lucifer's story wasn't all that different from Moon's. He had once been the first demon lord in history, above every life form on planet Elmer. After claiming the title of the strongest, in his arrogance, he challenged his own god. At the start of the battle, Lucifer summoned a blinding light, which soon it transformed into a magical sword, many times larger than the god himself. Lucifer hurled it straight at the god. The god couldn't stop it and was cleaved in half, unable to defend. After defeating that god, Lucifer took his place, but he still wasn't satisfied. He challenged every god in the divine realm. He crushed them one by one and seized the highest throne. Even as a demon, he became the god of gods, an absolutely invincible supreme legend, a name everyone revered. But his glory didn't last long. One day, Mu appeared and defeated him just as easily as he had crushed all the others. Right in front of everyone, Lucifer's image shattered, his pride burning with humiliation and rage. Lucifer swore an oath. "I will take revenge on this human's offspring, on Mu's bloodline." Back in the present, Mu was calmly riding his dragon link, heading toward his domain. A demon, probably sent by Lucifer himself, was shadowing Mu's every move, waiting for the perfect chance to strike back. Just like Lucifer was counting every moment for his chance to avenge his disgrace. Meanwhile, that bully from Lee's school, who had just regained consciousness, was also lying in his hospital bed, seething with impatience. He wanted Lee dead. He picked up his phone and decided he'd have to call someone even stronger to teach Lee a lesson. Boiling with anger, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. On the other side of the city, someone was unleashing all his strength on a punching bag. That boy was the youth division middleweight boxing champion. His intense training session suddenly came to a halt because of a blaring ringtone. Annoyed, Chul froze his punch in midair. Sweat was dripping down his body as he turned to see whose useless phone was making that noise. Just then, another boy with blonde hair casually walked in and said it was his phone. He went over, picked it up, and answered in an irritated tone. That boy was Chul, a boxer with 2 years of experience. The caller was none other than the same beaten-up bully, his helplessness obvious in his voice. All he wanted was a small job done for him. At first, Chul was a bit surprised by the request, but when he realized how easy and profitable the deal was, he agreed and asked exactly what he had to do in return. The next day in class, when everything seemed normal, that bully walked in like nothing had happened. As he headed toward his seat, the entire classroom went completely silent for a moment. Every eye was fixed on him. At first, he tried to ignore it. But when the whispers turned into jokes about how he'd been neutered, he couldn't take it anymore. To keep himself from becoming the butt of everyone's jokes, he slammed his bag hard on the floor and shouted that even now, even neutered, he could still beat everyone up. He challenged anyone who doubted his strength. At that moment, the class president, a girl with glasses, stood up and yelled that he should either shut up or get out of the classroom. Hearing a girl talk to him like that made the bully even angrier. He couldn't stand that even the class president was now ready to stand up to him. In a fit of rage, he grabbed a random chair and was just about to hurl it at the girl to remind everyone what fear felt like. But right then, the classroom door burst open and a huge teacher walked in. All the students jumped, and the bully immediately put the chair down and sat in his seat as if nothing had happened. The teacher looked around, then at the class president, who was still standing there, furious. She asked what had happened and why she was out of her seat, but the girl didn't tell the truth. She quietly went back to her seat and said it was nothing important. The teacher didn't press her any further, but as she was leaving, she told the girl to come see her after class. Hearing that, the girl grew a bit curious about why the teacher wanted to talk to her alone after school. When she met the teacher, she learned that the teacher wanted a favor from her, since she was the class president and someone the teacher could rely on. The teacher asked her to go check on Lee, who'd been absent that day and wasn't answering his phone. In return, the teacher promised to write her a recommendation letter that could help her in her senior year. It sounded like a favor, but she knew it wasn't something she could refuse. Nervous, but without complaining, she agreed. Not wasting a second, she went straight to Lee's house. Her face stayed totally blank. She didn't care about Lee's condition at all. She just wanted to finish this errand as fast as possible. She knocked on the door and called out to see if anyone was home. When no one answered, she hesitated for a moment, then turned the doorknob, and to her surprise, it was unlocked. She stepped inside slowly, and the moment she entered, she froze. Lee's body was lying in front of her, motionless. The room was filthy, and insects were crawling everywhere. Lee's state was horrifying. His eyes rolled, and his mouth hung open. Seeing this, the girl screamed in terror. She was sure Lee was dead. Without wasting a second, she snatched up her phone and called an ambulance. The paramedics arrived quickly and rushed Lee to the hospital. The doctors quickly figured out what had happened. Lee had probably collapsed from sheer starvation after the god move left his body. No one had been there to look after him. Now he was admitted to the hospital and hooked up to a nutrient IV to stabilize his condition. Then something strange happened. Lee, who had been completely still until then, suddenly began to twitch. At that moment, MU returned to his body. As soon as MU opened his eyes, he was utterly confused. This place felt completely unfamiliar to him. Before MU could make sense of anything, he felt something odd. When he looked down, he realized something was stuck in his hand. It was a thin tube feeding nutrient serum into his body. A god who had spent his entire life only in battle and fighting new enemies had no knowledge of the tools or technology of this era's humans, and this strange serum was no exception. He stared at it with curiosity and a hint of unease, as if trying to figure out what on earth was going on. Even though he knew nothing about the serum like a god, he immediately understood that this thing was sending something into his body, and only through his veins. With his godly senses, he could clearly feel that his body was rapidly absorbing those nutrients, making his recovery incredibly fast. To Mew, it felt as if some healing magic was being cast, though he knew very well this wasn't magic. As Lee slowly began to move his head and regain consciousness, the girl sitting nearby noticed that he was now awake. But that strange smile on his face made her think this guy might be a little crazy. Even so, she still asked, "Do you remember what happened to you?" But without waiting for his answer, she quickly grabbed her bag, stood up and said, "I'm going back to school to report everything to the teacher like you said." MU immediately sat up and tried to stop her. He didn't really know who this girl was, but he assumed she was probably the one who had helped him recover so quickly. Yet, in typical MU style, instead of thanking her, he asked for something else. The girl just wanted to bail and leave MU alone, not really curious about this guy's life. He pulled the serum line out of his own vein, gave that same creepy smile and asked, "Do you know any place where I can become strong?" The girl slightly turned her head and shot him a sideways glance. One look at him, and you'd know he'd never done a push-up in his life. Plus, his filthy rundown house made it seem like he had zero interest in sports. After a brief think, she remembered a place. Nothing special, just a small outdoor gym in a nearby park, with some basic exercise equipment set up. MU didn't waste a second and headed straight for the park. He went right into pull-ups, pushing himself to the limit until his arms completely gave out, and dropped down and lay there, catching his breath. His sweat-soaked body turned, looking around in every direction. MU was impressed. To him, these simple exercise setups were no less than high-end professional training gear. He'd returned to Earth after nearly 4,000 years, and never really cared to see how much humans had advanced. To someone like an Earth god, even this basic gear felt like a total revolution. Back in his era, people trained in crude, primitive ways that were not only much harder, but also far less effective. Now Mew started messing around with every piece of equipment he could find, even though he had no clue what any of them were actually for. Right in the middle of his training, something small slipped in behind him, and a little stone dropped to the ground. He turned around and froze. He'd brought a boxer with him. From a distance, that bully started hurling insults at MU, yapping like some cowardly dog but without the guts to come any closer. Mu didn't let his words get to him at all. He sat, grabbed the stone, and asked who'd chucked it at him. The boy who'd been acting tough got even bolder now that his friend was there, so he shouted out, "I threw it!" Then he started running his mouth, saying Lee would have to pay for this and that his cousin, a professional boxer, would kill him. But while he was talking, Mun saw an opening and punched him in the face. The boy dropped to the ground, screaming in pain as his already broken nose got shattered all over again. That's what you get for chucking a stone at a god, and Mun's grin only widened as he watched. For him, it was all about what it meant. But in the true realm of the gods, things were even more heated. A routine gathering of the gods was about to begin, but Mook didn't show up. Instead, his only assistant, Dragon Link, arrived in his place. Nervous, the little dragon started to read the message out loud, but he had barely gotten a few words out when Lucifer cut him off. Glaring at him, he said, "How does a mere assistant dare to walk into a meeting of the gods and, on top of that, speak before Lucifer himself?" The poor Dragon Link was terrified by Lucifer's overwhelming presence. Panicking, he stammered, "I only came to deliver a message. I never meant any disrespect." Shaking with fear, but still forcing himself to continue, Dragon Link began reading the letter in a trembling voice. But the message itself wasn't anything special. It was the same old thing. Moon was telling the other gods that if they found any worthy opponents, they should let him know so he could fight them. When Lucifer heard this, he exploded with rage and slammed his hand down on the table. As the second most powerful god in the divine realm, he couldn't stand Muck always doing whatever he wanted, and now even skipping the gods' meetings. Technically, he wasn't wrong, and most of the gods secretly agreed with him. But none of them had the guts to openly criticize Mun. Lucifer then raised his voice. "These meetings of the gods exist so we can keep our world safe and stable. But to Mook, everything feels like a game, and that's his biggest problem." Right then, the third strongest god, the Archer god, spoke up as well. He said that if something abnormal is happening on Earth, the responsibility is on us, not on Mun alone. And that was exactly the kind of statement that a top god like Mun would never accept. Lucifer seized the moment and slammed his hand on the table again, even harder than before. In Lucifer's eyes, this habit Mun has of treating everything like a game is pushing all the worlds to the brink of collapse. Every time Mun has tried to solve a problem, the situation has only gotten worse. To drive his point home, Lucifer turned to the Cyclops god, the ninth-ranked deity of the divine realm, and asked if he remembered that incident from 1,000 years ago, when the Cyclops planet was on the verge of destruction. A terrifying, gigantic creature, as large as the entire planet itself, had attacked the Cyclops planet. It wasn't some ordinary monster. It was a rare, wide creature that could swallow an entire planet in just a few seconds. And just as it started ripping the planet apart, something shot straight through the middle of its body, splitting it into two uneven halves. That something was none other than God Mun himself, wearing his usual happy, flushed expression. The moment he got the chance to fight, Mun finished that giant creature with a single strike. Lucifer used this story to argue that all the collateral destruction from that incident was entirely Moon's fault. He argued that if Moon had teamed up with the other gods instead of rushing in solo, the damage wouldn't have been nearly as catastrophic. After laying out his case in full, and likely pulling most of the gods over to his side, Lucifer delivered his verdict. A guy who isn't even fit to be a god, giving him another chance is the same as gambling with the safety of our worlds. Meanwhile, Dragon Link was in total shock. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just kept silently praying to his god, "Please come back before everything gets even worse." The scene cuts back to Earth, where that beaten-up boy starts running his mouth again. He yells at Mun, "I'll call my boxer cousin. He'll get revenge on you for what you did." That same boxer cousin, hearing this, got a little interested. Watching Mun's movements and the speed of his punches, he was even impressed for a moment. Curious, he asked, "Do you do martial arts or play any sports?" But Mun casually replied, "I don't play any sports. I just like fighting, not playing." The moment Kial heard this, he wrote Mun off as some overconfident, idiotic middle schooler. He spat out his chewing gum and, smirking, slipped into a fighting stance. All right, just like you wanted. Let's start. Kyeol made the first move, rushing forward at high speed to test Mun. His first punch was fast and precise, landing straight on Mun's face. Mun didn't even have time to dodge or block, but the way he reacted shook Kyeol to his core. As an experienced boxer, Kyeol watched every little movement, and it felt completely abnormal to him that Mun, even after clearly seeing the punch coming, didn't move at all. Just like that beaten-up boy who had harassed Kyeol earlier, he had no idea that Mun wasn't human at all, but a god, and a god obsessed with fighting. Kyeol had no clue that Mun never avoids a preemptive strike. For him, taking the first hit is the signal. Now the real fight had begun. With a creepy grin, Mun shouted, "Is hand-to-hand combat your favorite thing too?" Seeing that terrifying smile and bizarre behavior, Kyeol started wondering if this kid was some kind of psycho teenager. Then suddenly, Mung copied Chol's fighting stance and jumped straight at him. To Chol, it just looked like some cheap copycat move. He calmly blocked Mung's punch, or at least he thought he had. In reality, the force of Mung's punch pushed him backward. His arm shook with pain. He was stunned that a boy who looked so weak could hit that hard. Mung's face looked even more fired up now. He was genuinely enjoying his own power, but he knew this body was still weak, so he couldn't rely on it completely. When he threw a punch and fully tensed his muscles after impact, the muscles in his arm started screaming like they were saying, "Bro, we need rest." But Mem didn't care. The pain only hyped him up more. To him, this was a real fight, the kind of thrill he didn't get even in his god form. Chol was still confused when MU took off his belt and wrapped it around his arm. He knew this body was fragile and would need time to recover, so this smart move could save him. The beaten-up boy watching from the side started yelling. Using a belt is unfair, but obviously Mo and Kyeol couldn't care less about what he thought. Chol attacked again, this time more serious than before. He threw punches in a relentless stream, left, right, non-stop. Mo blocked most of the punches, but because of the pain, his body was pretty limited. Kyeol's attack was insanely aggressive. While defending, Mo started analyzing his opponent's style. He realized Kyeol was fast and accurate, but also very predictable. In just a short time, Mo began to read his every move. When Chell tried to catch him off guard, Mo not only blocked his punch, but also smashed his arm mid-swing. Chell couldn't even process what had just happened. Within seconds, his arm was broken. He screamed in pain, and Mo just watched him in silence, almost amused by his condition. Hearing okay, Mo got a bit confused. He wondered if that guy from Chol and Lee's class might be his cousin. Both of them had the same overdramatic behavior. But Mo didn't waste any more time. He snapped out another quick punch and sent the distracted Kale out cold. For a moment, everything went silent, and that friend or cousin or whatever he was just stood there, totally stunned. Then the expression on his face slowly shifted, a frighteningly excited look. His whole face lit up with the thrill of the fight. He announced that now was the time to settle everything, especially since this wasn't the first time you guys had messed with him. The boy who'd been so full of swagger earlier now understood the situation perfectly. He was done for, and there was nobody left who could help him. His painful end was guaranteed now, and there was no escape. Mung slowly walked toward Lee's classmate to settle the score for today's fight. As soon as he got close, he realized the guy in front of him was in no condition to fight anymore. But Mung didn't care, because this was the same boy who had thrown the stone to start the fight and had called the boxer. Without the slightest bit of mercy, Mung beat him down brutally. He tested his new copy techniques one by one, and in the end finished him with a powerful knee strike. Now Mung felt calm, but one thought kept bothering him. Why doesn't this boy ever give up? Then it hit him. He'd never given the kid a chance to surrender. Mung had scarred the boxer too, then walked away from both of them. Back at Lee's house, he sat on the bed, satisfied that everything was going according to his plan. But his weak body and fragile bones started acting up again, so he decided that. Now he was going to check what was happening there and grab the thing he'd told Dragonlink to find. He attempted a soul transfer, but this time, nothing happened. When he opened his eyes, he realized he was still in Lee's house. He couldn't understand why he wasn't able to return to his true body. Everything that was happening in the God realm had actually begun in Lucifer's domain. A few days earlier, Mew had forcibly thrown Lee down to the planet, and he'd done it without Lucifer's permission. We already know that on that day, MU completely ignored Lucifer and didn't care at all what he thought. MU came, did whatever he wanted, and left. But he had no idea that his actions were pushing Lucifer to his breaking point. When MU was on his way back to his own domain, Dragonlink asked him about his trip to Earth. MU excitedly told him how much he'd enjoyed that visit, but also mentioned that his new body felt quite weak on Earth. In that same conversation, Mew ordered his assistant to find another recovery magic item, thinking it might help his body recover faster. But there was a small problem. On Elmer and other planets, magic items were common because of the abundance of mana. On Earth, it was different. Magical objects were obtained through divine blessings or the will of God, which made them extremely rare. Because of this, in all of human history, only a handful of people ever managed to use them naturally, and such people were seen as godlike in the eyes of humans. When MU returned to his domain, Dragonlink promised that the next time he came to the God realm, a magic orb would be ready for him. Dragonlink grumbled, "You're always teasing your poor assistant, even during council meetings on divine offerings." MU casually slipped his hand into his pants pocket and said he'd prepared something for him because of his constant complaints. The assistant couldn't believe it. But it wasn't a gift, just a small letter. And we already know what that letter said. After delivering his message and wrapping up his duty, MU walked straight over to that miniature Earth model, placed his hand on its surface, and tried to return to Lee's body. Dragonlink, already irritated, still kept trying to stop him. "At least attend the meeting," he insisted. But MU ignored him yet again and sent his soul back down to Earth. None of them realized that a minor demon was hovering high above, quietly watching and reporting every single move to MU's greatest enemy. We jump back to the present, where Lucifer was putting the whole situation together. He had no idea what MU was actually planning, but there was one thing he was absolutely sure of. MU's body was currently empty, without a soul. MU skipping the meeting convinced Lucifer that he wouldn't be in the God realm for a while, and that's when it hit him. This was a once-in-a-thousand-years chance for revenge, and there was no way he was going to let it slip by. Without any warning, Lucifer suddenly triggered his spell. The instant it activated, razor-sharp purple lightning bolts shaped like spears came crashing down on Dragonlink. But Dragonlink's instincts were just as sharp. At the very last second, he sprang back and dodged every single spear. The awkward, embarrassed look he'd had a moment ago vanished. His face was now dead serious, ready for battle. He shouted furiously, "What is this supposed to mean? Are you really declaring war on MU, the god of Earth?" Lucifer was completely at ease now. He knew MU wouldn't be stepping in. Hovering lazily in the air, he said he would personally drag MU down from his divine throne, and that was his formal declaration of war. Without a moment's hesitation, Dragonlink compressed his fiery breath and fired a lethal blast of flame that shot toward Lucifer like a laser. For a second, it looked like Lucifer had been caught off guard, but he slipped past it effortlessly. And, surprisingly, the flame didn't vanish. Spinning midair, it streaked to the far edge of the god's realm and exploded. The blast was so violent that the archer god had to throw up a magical shield around himself first, then extend it to cover the other gods. The other gods panicked, but Lucifer didn't so much as budge. He didn't flinch, didn't run, didn't even raise a shield. Firestorms and shockwaves ripped across the realm like a nuke, yet he stood there untouched. Dragonlink realized his opening killing move had done absolutely nothing, so he triggered his ultimate technique. The pollen of release began reshaping his entire body. Wild red lightning crackled around him, and a crushing aura wrapped his form, leaving no doubt how far he was willing to go to protect his master. But Lucifer still stood there untouched. In fact, he smirked and said, I'll take care of Mu's little girl like you first. Then it'll be Mu's turn to pay for the punishment he gave me. The dragon made it clear he was ready to do anything to save his master, but the battle didn't go his way. Mu's royal assistant, Dragon Link himself, was utterly defeated by Lucifer. He was caught in Lucifer's living taxidermy spell. He couldn't move, couldn't resist. His entire body was shredded with injuries. The archer god let out a long sigh and said offhandedly, "This place is no longer fit for a proper divine meeting," then left. The remaining gods just stood there, stunned. Watching this horrifying clash between Lucifer and Dragon Link had frozen them in fear. No one twitched. The idea of helping wasn't considered. The way the archer god had just strolled out so casually did not escape Lucifer's notice. Lucifer suddenly called out to him and, fixing him with a razor-sharp stare, asked bluntly, "Whose side are you on? For the expulsion? Or against it?" But the archer god just floated there and replied in the same casual tone, "I'm neutral. I neither support nor oppose." Lucifer didn't like that answer one bit, but he still said, "Fine. As long as you don't interfere, I'm okay with it." Then he turned his fury on the remaining gods and asked if anyone had any objections to removing Mu. But seeing Dragon Link's condition, seeing a god level being reduced to such a miserable state, no one had the courage to utter a single word. Meanwhile, Dragon Link was still alive, still trying to warn Lucifer, "You can't stand against God Mu." Lucifer just smirked and dropped a chilling revelation. He knew Mu wasn't here right now. Mu was living on Earth inside a weak, pathetic human body. Dragon Link was completely stunned. He thought this secret was known only to him, but now it all made sense. Why Lucifer had chosen this exact moment to start his rebellion. Lucifer, however, never admitted he'd spied on Mu to learn all this. Instead, he dumped all the blame on Dragon Link. He said Dragon Link's overconfidence and lack of vigilance had handed him this opportunity. Knowing all this, Dragon Link couldn't swallow the insult. He had no options left. He made one last desperate attempt, launching a surprise attack with his massive tail, hoping that maybe this time Lucifer would be caught off guard. But the same thing happened again. Lucifer stood there, completely calm, as if he knew nothing, and at the very last second, he dodged with perfect precision. Then, using a magical weapon, he chopped off Dragon Link's tail. Whether it was a spear or a sword didn't matter. Lucifer's power alone was enough. The dragon's tail was hacked into pieces, but Lucifer didn't kill him because he knew that as long as Mu's assistant stayed alive, he could use him to trace Mu's location on Earth. He thought about catching Mu in that fragile human body and making him feel the same humiliation Lucifer had once suffered. That was all the satisfaction he needed. His demonic laughter echoed through the air while Dragon Link coughed up blood, his whole body trembling, completely powerless. He couldn't do anything. And on the other side, on Earth, things weren't looking good either. Chol was badly injured, and his coach harshly scolded him for getting into a street fight. As a punishment, he had to take a long recovery break before his important matches. After the lecture, the coach dismissed him. Walking out of the gym, he kept blaming Lee in his head for this whole mess. Just as he reached the exit, Lee entered the gym from the front, and the two of them ended up awkwardly face to face. Lee immediately noticed how badly beaten and furious he was, and without delay, asked what happened to you. Chul was embarrassed. He was ashamed to admit that some random, weak-looking guy had beaten him. He was one of the country's best boxers, and right then, a sneaky idea popped into his head. He lowered his bruised face, put on a sad and shameful expression, and then he started lying. And to make it believable, he even forced himself to cry. Tears kept falling onto the floor. He spun a story about how he'd gone to help his brother who was being bullied, and how the bullies had ganged up on him and beaten him mercilessly in return. He started crying like a little kid, covering his face. He presented himself as an innocent victim who only wanted to do the right thing. He thought Lee would get emotional, but Lee stayed completely stone-faced. He ignored the tears and just casually walked past him. Nicolte it nebula match sepela sambal ke hakar sub terigaldie. Chul's whole plan fell apart as soon as Lee left. He stopped crying. Disappointment spread across his face. But just as he turned to go, Lee's voice came again. He froze on the spot. He figured Lee saw through his lie. But he had actually accepted it now and was just asking, "Who did all this to you?" Shiar ke dusre konamin mona bilike gandabista parbai ta ta. His frustration kept piling up. He kept wondering why he couldn't go back to his real body. With all his divine knowledge and experience, he could only reach one conclusion. His original godly body had been badly damaged somewhere. Yet even that explanation didn't feel right to him. He knew a dragon link was guarding him, and his body wasn't some ordinary thing that could be damaged so easily. Then his eyes went wide. The realization slammed into him. Did all the gods attack me together? Now, this theory started to feel right. He jumped off the bed in a panic. If that was true, then he didn't have any time. He had to act fast. He had no idea what to do. And the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. In his frustration, he smashed Lee's pillow with a punch, thinking, if I don't get back into my body, everything could spin out of control. His mood sank even further. He couldn't stand the thought that those gods who never had the guts to face him one-on-one were now taking advantage of his current condition. Unable to hold back his rage, Mun started pounding the bed and pillow again and again. Only one wish kept looping through his mind. Just give me one chance to put all those cowardly gods in their place. If he got that chance, he swore he'd turn them all into stew and eat them. After a while, when he was worn out, he stopped punching. Now it's better if I calm down and think, he reminded himself. The Dragon Link, that's my protector. He's not some pushover who'll go down so easily, even if all the gods come at him together. That thought cooled him off a bit. Moon thought that if he couldn't do much with this weak body, then at least he should make it stronger. Thinking this would boost his chances of survival, he headed back to the training area. This time he dove into training full force, skipping his usual muscles and hammering the ones he'd been neglecting. When he finally tightened his abs the right way, it was like they were on fire with pain. But strangely, that very pain made the training more enjoyable. He kept doing pull-ups, and the more it hurt, the more he laughed. His crazed laughter echoed through the entire hall. Hearing that obnoxious laughter, the others started seeing him as some psycho or weirdo training there, when suddenly someone called his name. That unexpected voice broke his focus, and he dropped straight to the floor with a loud thud. The one who had called him was none other than that same girl, Lee's class president. She was clearly annoyed, but not because of his loud laughter. She was angry that Lee hadn't shown up at school for several days. To avoid making a scene, the two of them decided to sit somewhere quiet. They found a bench in a corner and started talking. There, he casually said, "Why should I go to school? There's no way to train my body there anyway." The girl pressed him further. "Why are you always training?" He just shrugged and gave a simple answer. "I just want to become stronger." The class president cocked her head a little and asked, "Why do you want to get stronger?" Grinning, he said, "So I can win fights, and so I can face stronger opponents. Right now, my body's too weak, so everything feels scary." After that, he launched into an excited rant. Without pausing for breath, he started explaining his training and fighting philosophy. Vugantuntak bakbakartara, ar woladki uski bakwas suntirahi, porhogai kizamin, mengaib ho janachatithi, tong akar skulkilia utkarihui, jatujate uske dimagmain eki idea, agaya. Casually, as if it was no big deal, she said, "What's the point of training so hard? When there's no one in front of you to fight? Standing there?" The girl said, "Go to school, meet people, and start conflicts. Then you'll have plenty of people to fight." Saying this, she left, and he stayed there, sitting and thinking. Her logic honestly impressed him a bit. It was true. After what he'd done to those bullies, they were never going to come near him again. And without them, he'd have to look for some stronger opponent. For the first time, he seriously thought about going to school. And just as he was thinking that, a shadowy figure came up behind him and asked, "Are you Leo? Uske chera parmasktha, hatmain hatyar." But he didn't feel any need to answer. He had already understood what this was. His shocked expression instantly relaxed. Everything was turning out even easier than he'd imagined. Now he didn't even need to look for his next opponent. The opponent had come to him on his own. With a faint smirk, he turned his head. He readied himself for that inevitable first strike and fight. It was obvious that the masked boy was none other than Kankshaw. There was something about Kankshaw that set him apart from everyone else, even from those bullies he had faced years ago, when he was just 15 and had slowly started to shine in boxing. His sister was a promising rookie ballerina, and since she was his only family, Kang supported her in every possible way. Mentally, emotionally, and however else he could help. Everything was going perfectly fine until a creepy stalker's eyes landed on his sister. The man's obsession grew day by day, and then one day he completely lost control and crossed the line. He quietly followed her, and as soon as she turned into a deserted alley, the stalker decided this was his chance to carry out his sick intentions. But luckily, Kang was nearby. He quickly noticed what was happening, and before the stalker could do any harm to his sister, Kang suddenly stepped in and launched a surprise attack on him, stopping him right there. He didn't let her get even a scratch. The police were called, and that stalker was arrested. But since Kang stepped in early and the stalker hadn't technically broken any laws yet, there wasn't enough proof to really punish him. Within a short time, that man was released. But now his obsession had reached a dangerous peak. It had turned into madness, with the fire of revenge mixed into it. It didn't take long before that man found the girl again, this time in some other deserted spot. But now he had a kitchen knife in his hand, making it clear that this time his intentions were far more dangerous. Yet again, Kang appeared there out of nowhere, as if he had materialized from thin air. Philby Kangner's Barbie Usroka bus is Dafa Woda Sepulja. His sister's leg was badly injured, and her dream of becoming a ballerina shattered like a broken swan. Kang blamed the law for this, for failing to protect his sister, and from that very day, he decided he would no longer trust the law. Belkis Netaliagi ab civil bus bahikarega Joseph Sahilagi. His first step was to almost beat that creepy man to death. That was just the beginning. Kang resolved that from now on, whenever he saw any suspicious gang or any person who was harming others for no reason or bullying them, he would jump in, not with warning words, but with his new favorite weapon, which was action. By now, Kang had become an anti-bully vigilante who didn't see fighting as violence, but as justice. And that was the reason he had come after Mun. Back in the present, Mun was standing there, taking Kang's sudden punch without offering any resistance. He took a sucker punch from behind that would have dropped most people, but to Mun, it landed like a light tap. It wasn't the kind of heavy strike he was used to. From that first hit, Mun started wondering if Kang was just testing his reactions or if this was meant as a warning shot. Either way, Mun didn't care. All he needed was confirmation that the fight had started, and now he had it, just like always. Moon's blood was already boiling with excitement, but he still didn't realize this opponent wouldn't be as easy as the ones before. On the other side, Kang immediately jumped into the fight without holding back. He was thrown off that Mun didn't look like some guy who beat people up for fun like he'd been told. Kang had no idea that everything he'd heard was a lie, a story Chill had cooked up just to impress him, but Mun had zero intention of defending himself or explaining anything. He brushed off Kang's words and said casually, "Don't waste time with small talk. Do something." That single line bruised Kang's ego and made him trust Young's story even more. Now he was fully convinced that Mun really was as unhinged as the rumors said. Kang did exactly what Mun wanted. He charged in and, without wasting a heartbeat, started swinging. But Mun was ready. Kang threw punch after punch with the form of a professional boxer. The surprising part was that Mun slipped past every single punch with ease. With each dodge, his confidence only grew. Kang now realized this opponent wasn't just bluffing, he really did know how to fight. So Kang decided to crank things up. He flicked out a light right hand to block Mun's vision and opened a path for a heavy shot. But Kang was stunned to see that Mun had already read the move and shut it down too. For Mun, this was just a warm-up. It felt like he'd found the perfect target for his punching practice. Now he's at it again. He started pouring on the punches, and this time Ma could clearly feel they were hitting way harder than before. Exactly what you'd expect from a champion-level boxer going all out. Kag kept the pressure on non-stop. Ma didn't get even a moment to breathe. Every punch came with a force that drove him further and further back. Ma was completely cornered now. There was nowhere left to run. Kag kept hammering his weak spots, making it almost impossible for Mutt to concentrate on the fight. Then came the moment when Kag finally found a perfect opening and drove in a bone-crushing punch. The pain in Musk's side was like taking the same full-power kick to the exact same spot over and over. Seiji stepped back a little to let Musk writhe in that sharp pain. But as he moved away, he said coldly, "I'm deliberately going for your weak and injured spots, because in my eyes, trash like you doesn't deserve mercy." But instead of getting scared or angry, M, who was twisting in pain, suddenly started laughing. His laughter threw CAG off for a second, but then it really started to get under his skin. He couldn't believe Emma would react like that, and that was exactly what made CAG even more furious. Now, CAG turned even more vicious than before. On the other side, MO had fully grasped just how massive the gap was between CAG's strength and his own. SAF, Takiyiga Lugly Kai with Lee's body. Ma knew he couldn't beat CAG in a straight power contest, but for someone who's a complete fighting maniac, giving up just isn't on the table. Surrender just wasn't in his nature. Up against an opponent who wasn't playing fair, Ma realized he'd have to fight by the same rules. He just had to stay sharp, stay alert, and wait for the right opening. With thousands of years of combat behind him, Ma instantly recalled an old fight that was almost identical to what he was facing now. It was one of those rare fights where Ma had actually come close to being overpowered. Even back then, when things were unbearable, Ma never once regretted choosing to fight. Even in that rush, he felt a strange kind of satisfaction. But this time, it wasn't just about having fun or soaking up pain. Ma was dead set on winning this fight no matter what. So he forced himself to shut off all his emotions for a moment just to calm down. That creepy grin vanished from his face, and he started carefully studying his opponent's movements. Just as another punch was about to smash into his face, Ma moved. He used his filthy, torn cloak to throw Kag off for just a split second and carved out a tiny opening for himself. The more Ma started thinking, the more he used that tiny bird-sized brain of his, the smarter and more dangerous he became. Back then, he used that opening to land several clean hits on that joint monster, but disappointingly, his attacks didn't seem to have any real effect. That thing was in a completely different league from Ma. Even so, Ma never stopped keeping his emotions in check. He kept hunting for openings like that and kept on fighting. In the end, he did lose, but somehow he survived. And even in that painful defeat, he still felt that thrill of slipping out of that fight and getting away. What was happening now wasn't all that different. So Mutt decided to use the same strategy again. Shut off his emotions, fight with his brain. And even if this strategy failed, at least he could enjoy getting beaten up. His first move was to switch off his emotions and put on a dull, blank expression. But since he had no idea what Lee's face would look like with every emotion stripped away, he just improvised. Seeing this new expression and comparing it to that earlier next-level face, CAG got even more annoyed. He felt like Mo was mocking him, and Kag's anger spiked. Now, CAG decided to finish this fight now. Ma, relying purely on brute strength, acted like he had no clue. Argue kya hoon wala hai, usi ikui khabar nahi mastika raho. Jesse Hikag. Argue bat karne us par guse barsa diye. Ma lagatar peach hat taraha, jitna hosaka bachtara. He was sent crashing into a tree in no time. That's when he realized he'd have to switch tactics. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. He dug his foot into the ground and in one swift motion, flung dirt toward Keg's face. A bit of dirt did reach Kag's face, but since he was wearing protective glasses and quickly covered up with his hands, he barely took any damage. Instead, Kag's suspicions were now completely confirmed. He became absolutely certain that Ma was a criminal who deserved a beating. Suddenly, Ma lowered his head. making CAG hesitate for a moment. But it was all just an act. With a faint smirk, Ma taunted him. "What? You froze from fear?" That line hit CAG right in the gut, and his rage shot through the roof. Now, CAG didn't need any more motivation. Without a second thought, he launched another lightning-fast attack. But this time, all was ready. With that same dumb-looking face, he slipped past the punch with ease. Seiji wasn't about to let him off that easily. With a sudden shift, he slid behind Mo to strike from his blind spot. But once again, Mo dodged that attack too, though this time, Kag's fist did skim Mush's chin, causing a bit of damage. But Ma didn't care at all, because now he was completely sure his plan was working. Kag no longer had the same sharp focus as before, and Ma quickly picked up on the biggest difference between CAG and his previous two opponents. Kag's fighting style was far more aggressive. Us Pele defensive opponent Kate, Alter Mucky Sob, say skillier ability. Kasoth Zamimbi is Faka reasoned Hitch or Eli, Usnapeli Matifeki. His real goal wasn't to hit Kag in the face, but to scatter dirt and tiny stones all over the ground. That created a bunch of small obstacles on the terrain, making it harder for Kiji to move around freely. Seiji's wild aggression, mixed with Ma's constant taunting, was making his movements predictable, and now Ma could block his attacks with far less effort. At first, Ma had been struggling, getting beaten down over and over, but now he'd started slipping past Skag's blows again. Dodging wasn't his real aim, though. He was actually forcing CAG to keep moving until his stance started to fall apart. Ma knew that if Kag stepped on those stones and dirt, his footing would give way. That moment would be his, and it came. Seiji's foot landed on a stone, his concentration snapped, and Ma got the perfect opening. Without wasting a second, Ma lunged in. He knew he couldn't afford to blow this chance. He went for a vital spot, but mid-air he felt his arm fail to respond, probably from all those punches that had been blocked. Even then, he didn't back off. Instead of a punch, he drove in with his elbow, and the strike was so strong that Kag's glasses exploded into shards and he froze on the spot, in shock. For Ma, this was like hitting the jackpot, and of course, he wasn't about to let it slip. Ma started mocking CAG again. He kept hurling insults, laughing, and taking cheap verbal shots at his condition. But this is where Ma screwed up. He got so caught up scheming his next move and riling CAG that he stopped noticing what was happening right in front of him. Seiji drew his weapon and savagely crushed Ma's leg. A heartbeat later, Ma felt a pain so overwhelming that he dropped to his knees, as if his mind couldn't even process what had just happened. Now CAG was standing right in front of him, weapon resting on his shoulder, and with a cold smirk he said, "What happened? Not laughing now? Not having fun anymore?" Seiji was done with Ma. No one had ever gotten under his skin this badly. He was so enraged, he decided he'd break Ma's jaw so he'd never laugh again. Ma was still on his knees, unable to move, unable to dodge, unable to escape. Just before the punch could land, Ma understood something. He had already given up. He closed his eyes, braced for the hit, and his thoughts began to drift. After almost 4,000 years, was he really about to taste defeat again? And Kang was all set to make him relive that bitter moment. But at the exact instant, Kang's punch was about to crush Ma's head. Kahinse ek patar hawameaya and smashed into Kang's face. The impact was so sudden that Kang lost his balance and staggered backward. Whatever that object was, it rolled away toward the waves and disappeared. It had stopped CAG's attack and saved Ma's life. Now, CAG was completely thrown off. He immediately started looking around to see who had thrown that thing. Just then, a faint, weak voice called out, "Master," slowly coming closer. Seiji's instincts went on high alert. He was the type who stuck to the shadows, hunting bullies from the dark, never wanting anyone to see his face. Without wasting a second, Kang grabbed his sweatshirt, threw it on, pulled the hood over his head, and vanished from there at high speed before anyone could show up and see him. As soon as Kang ran off, a small creature stepped out from behind. It looked like some kind of monster, and in a trembling voice said, "Master, Ma snapped his head toward it in shock and was stunned by what he saw. It was a small, lizard-like being. There was a creature with horns on its head. To Mush, it wasn't a stranger. He knew that he himself had once transformed this tiny lizard into a majestic dragon and made him his assistant. Even though his appearance was completely different now, Mush recognized him at once. Mush and the little dragon Link went home. Back home, Dragon Link began explaining Mush's condition and the whole situation. What was happening in the God's realm, and how he himself had ended up on Earth in this body. He said that after Mush lost to Lucifer, Lucifer had captured Mush's true divine body and sealed it inside a barrier. A barrier that could neither be broken nor crossed. It separated time and space so that Mush's soul could never return to his body, and so that no one could interfere with Lucifer's plans. Lucifer took Mush's body into his own domain and kept constant watch over it. There was always a satisfied smile on Lucifer's face, because he knew that without his body, Mush couldn't do much. But there was one problem. Lucifer couldn't come directly to Earth and finish Mush off. He knew only one way, to force Dragon Link to tell him how to reach Earth, Mush's planet. For this, Lucifer summoned the defeated dragon into his domain as well, and promised that if he helped him, he would make him the new god of Earth in Mush's place. Lucifer was completely sure that, tempted by such immense power, Mush's assistant would betray him. But Dragon Link didn't give any direct answer. He said something so softly that Lucifer couldn't hear him at all, and Lucifer lost his temper. Lucifer shouted, telling him to speak louder. Finally, Dragon Link spoke, but instead of answering, he pointed toward the barrier surrounding Mush's body and asked, "A barrier that blocks time and space, can it also block attacks?" Lucifer figured Dragon Link was probably trying to protect Mush, so he answered with full confidence, "No attack can ever damage this barrier. It's invincible. Forget all that and come over to my side." But right then, something strange happened. Lucifer, Nadeka, Pias Paz Derecha Magnalega. Suspicious. He glanced around, and what he saw made him go completely still. Dragon Link's wounded body was glowing with golden light, overflowing with energy. Lucifer was shocked at first, but that shock quickly turned into fear when Dragon Link suddenly shouted, a massive self-detonation. Before Lucifer could react, the roof of his castle was blown clean off. The place he used to control his domain from was completely destroyed. Bilkul Aglipal Uska Kila Asegaya Bogya. Jese nuclear damaka Nusa Mitadia Subse Heran Carnivali Bati Ki Damaka Itna Zabardastaki Devtown Kikaseka Stitumadia. Dragon Link was able to pour 99% of his total power into that explosion. Because of that, he reverted into a tiny, frail lizard, his whole body buried in dust and smoke. He knew there was no place left where he'd be safe, so he had only one option: get back to Earth, back to his master, Mush. But Lucifer had no intention of letting him escape so easily. Burning with rage and betrayal, Lucifer burst out of the dust and charged after Dragon Link. So furious, it felt like he'd already wiped that tiny lizard out of existence. Dragon Link ran for his life, but Lucifer conjured a magical spear and hurled it at him with everything he had. By the time the tiny Dragon Link had lost part of his tail, he was only a few meters away from Mush's throne in the Earth Gateway. Even so, the magical spear still missed him, and he first sprang onto Mush's throne, then onto the surface of the miniature Earth, vanishing from the god's realm. He reappeared in the sky above Earth, his energy completely spent. He didn't care where or how he would land. He just closed his eyes and left everything to fate. And fate decided he would become Mush's savior. He was the very thing that had crashed into Kag's face and stopped the final blow from landing. That thing was none other than the same exhausted tiny lizard. After hearing all this, Mush fell into deep thought. Chota Dragon Link Gabdhagya. But Mush wasn't sad. He was furious. His hatred toward Lucifer burned so fiercely that if he ever got his true body back, he wouldn't let Lucifer live even a second longer. Suddenly, Mush's expression shifted from rage to excitement. He felt that maybe now he might get another chance to fight Lucifer, a proper, all-out battle. The little assistant was a bit stunned. Even after all these years, he still wasn't used to Mush's sudden mood and energy swings. Mush hated this body, wished it was better. yet somehow felt he'd found a new purpose. But deep down he knew that with this body, he wouldn't last a moment in front of Lucifer. So there was only one path left, to make Lee's body stronger. Yet Lee's body was so weak and damaged that even throwing a light punch into the air made it feel like everything inside was breaking. Mush had just one wish. If only this new body could heal faster. That's when he remembered he had told Dragon Link to find a magical orb for him. Almost hopeless, he asked, "Did you bring that orb?" Surprisingly, Dragon Link said yes, or at least claimed so, because he had no pockets, no bag. He had hidden the orb inside his own stomach. Now, at Mush's request, he slowly started pulling that thing out. But since it was even bigger than him, Mush's assistant had to struggle a bit to drag it all the way out for his god. When he finally managed to pull it out completely, Dragon Link explained that this was a dragon bloodstone, inside which a top-tier healing spell was infused. The tiny lizard apologized that he had only brought one. He said he'd been rushing and obviously couldn't bring much. Uni, Lars. Suke Northeast Cabin, Tizarna Hiquia Toronto, Southeast, Udakar Gorsta Iknalega. As soon as Mush took it in his hand, he thanked Dragon Link and said that for now, this orb was enough. Without any hesitation, Mush activated the orb, triggering its healing effect instantly, and at the same time, the orb began to shrink in size. Just a few seconds later, a green aura spread all around Mush's body, flowing out from the orb, and his wounds started healing on the spot. But the real fun began when Mush noticed something unexpected. The orb's effect wasn't limited to healing. He could feel that his muscles had become far more responsive and sensitive than before. There could be only one explanation. This orb was probably infused with a body enhancement spell as well, which was clearly upgrading Lee's weak body. Seeing Mush's impressed reaction, Dragon Link proudly admitted that he had put in the effort himself and infused his own magic into the dragon bloodstone. Mush kept staring at the remaining piece of the orb, admiring it, thinking that maybe because it was used on a weak human body, its full power hadn't been consumed, and that's why this fragment was left behind. He handed that fragment to the little lizard, giving him permission to use it himself. But Dragon Link didn't like the idea of wasting it on himself, so he decided he would save it for a future emergency for Mush. Just like before, he very carefully pushed it back into his stomach, into its resting place. The scene suddenly shifts to the other side of the city, where a rare yellow lizard lived. The surprising thing was that he was the favorite pet of the same girl we saw earlier. She didn't see him as just an animal, but treated him as her closest friend. She even wished he could talk so that the two of them would never get bored. After a bit of playful teasing, the girl put her pet back into his cozy little home and went out, probably to go to school. Because pets weren't allowed. She had to leave him behind so he could enjoy his own time. Peace returned to the house once again. That day, everything at school was normal too. No one was bossing anyone around. No one was causing trouble. Even that boy who had been beaten earlier was now sitting quietly at his desk. He now wore glasses and was completely focused on his studies. The pain he had felt after being beaten by Mush had shown him the right path. He'd stopped wasting time. Now he was busy preparing for his exams, determined to turn his life around. Everything was going smoothly until Mush burst into the classroom in his usual dramatic fashion. The moment he walked in, his eyes landed on that same boy he'd beaten up, and without a second thought he asked if he was ready for a fight. No one could tell if Mush was joking or serious, just like before in Javabani, with the class president girl standing behind him, stunned by his words. It was like she couldn't believe Lee was suddenly back at school after vanishing for so long. Mush, with the little lizard wriggling under his shirt and making a slight commotion, casually said he'd only come because she'd managed to convince him earlier. And then he added that, honestly, he'd mainly come to find someone he could fight and beat almost to death. His face and tone were so menacing that the girl started wondering what kind of new chaos Mush was about to unleash this time. Seeing no real danger for now, she simply told him, "Good luck." Half the day passed with no real incidents, nothing that truly brightened Mush's day. Downstairs, two Class 2 kids were chatting about the latest school happenings. Kag and a girl from his class. Since Kag usually had no idea what was going on at school, the girl started explaining everything to him in detail. A bit of gossip, some murmuring, the whole gang, plus a pinch of curiosity had Sundra trying to piece things together the moment school ended. School khatam hote, dono gate nikal pade. Ar ladki joshmain utarne lagi. According to the rumors, the boy who was always bullied finally snapped one day. He beat his tormentor so badly, kept hitting the bully so much, that the guy passed out and had to be rushed to the hospital. And if that wasn't shocking enough, hear this. That nerd even bit off his ear, and from that very day, he got the nickname neutered. At first, Kang had no idea she was talking about Lee, but as she kept describing the incident and mentioned that shady scene with the ripped deer in his mouth, everything clicked for Kang. Now, all the pieces lined up. That boy and Lee were one and the same. Kang suddenly remembered how those crocodile tears and that whole victim act were just manipulation. Also, Kang would take revenge for him. But since all of this was in the past and nothing could be done now, Kang decided it was better to let it go for the time being. On his way back home, King had no idea that MU was coming down the same road from the other side. MU was disappointed and frustrated that his day had turned out so boring. At school, everything had been a blur of memories and random moments. But in the end, he didn't get a single real chance. Just when MU was about to sink into almost complete hopelessness, his eyes landed on Kang. Kang was walking a bit awkwardly, clearly embarrassed as he talked with his female friend. Because Kang was wearing glasses and a mask, MU didn't recognize him right away, but something felt familiar. His hair color, height, build, everything matched. But real suspicion only kicked in when MU noticed the size and shape of his muscles. In just a second, MU was absolutely sure. MU's loud shout and sudden outburst obviously grabbed Kang's attention. The moment Kang turned around, he saw MU charging at him like a madman. Without wasting even a second, Kang bolted, leaving his stunned friend behind. Only one question was spinning in his head as he ran. How did MU recognize me? He was sure his pricey mask and glasses were enough to hide him. Then why was this lunatic chasing him? He had no answer, but one thing was clear. No matter what, he could not let himself get caught. The last thing he wanted was for this crazy guy to report him to the police or cause some other disaster. Desperate to escape, Kang just kept running. Then Kang suddenly decided to pull an unpredictable move. He spotted an alley up ahead and without a moment's hesitation, dove straight into it, hoping he could throw Mew off his trail. But MU didn't stop chasing. He was dead set on not letting Kang get away so easily. But the moment he entered the alley, Kang was gone. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. MU had been waiting for this perfect chance to fight Kang, but all his hopes got smashed when he realized Kang had actually disappeared. Dabimuki Shardke and Dars Dragonlink Bahar Iar Pucha Kya Wo Hilkar Guy Disney Ka Lord could challenge Kyatha. Wanting to help his god, the tiny lizard asked for permission to track Kong by scent, because yesterday Kong had hit him and he still remembered that strong, manly smell. MU gave him the green light, and Dragonlink started sniffing around like a trained puppy. He was fully into his new role when suddenly someone stepped right in front of him and blocked his way. Thankfully, he didn't get stepped on. The tiny lizard lifted his head and saw that it wasn't Kang standing there at all. It was the class president girl from Lee's class, frozen in place and staring at him. Her shock, though, didn't last. In no time, her eyes lit up with excitement, like she was seeing something this cute for the first time in her life. Dragonling had no idea who this girl was, and he also didn't know that. Unlike other humans, this girl absolutely loved lizards. He even forgot that he was a demigod, and that humans weren't supposed to be able to see him. He casually told the girl, "Saido Jiao, mujhe kam finish karna hai, but bilkul waisa nahi hua, jaise usne socha tha." The girl completely ignored him and scooped him up like some stuffed toy. Dragonling was stunned. He started squirming out of her grip, and annoyed, he snapped at her with an angry warning. I'm not some stray critter you can just grab and toss around. For a second, he actually wished he had even a tiny bit of magic left, just so he could run away from Dragonling. Us chote palme, layerki kinazarme wo sabse precious cheeseban gaya. Kyoanki ajib shakalki bawajud, wo husko korti rehi, manmain sochti, kitna cute. Yeah. She even went so far as to think he was cuter than her own pet, the one she'd loved the most up till now. Right then, Dragonling saw a chance and shot off, sprinting to hide behind Mew, who was hiding behind Lee's body. He hurriedly apologized, saying he'd failed because of the girl and blaming it on the fact that all his powers were gone, an excuse Dragonling himself found downright terrifying. The girl asked, "Is this little guy your friend?" MU glanced at his visibly rattled assistant and, after thinking for a moment, went with friend. Not totally sure, but yeah, he's my obedient assistant. The girl introduced herself as Kim Yugon, but the jealousy on her face was impossible to miss. MU had this cute, talking assistant, and a lizard no less. MU could read her emotions clearly, and that's when an idea popped into his head. In one sudden, unexpected move, MU shifted his leg, bringing Dragonling, who was clinging to him, closer to Kim and said, "If you want, I can lend him to you for a while. In return, I just need a little information." Poor Dragonling's opinion meant nothing to MU, and Kim was over the moon. I mean, for sharing a bit of information, she was getting this adorable little lizard. What better deal could she possibly get? MU didn't hesitate for even a second. He bent down, grabbed Dragonling by the neck, and held him out toward Kim. "Here, keep him as long as you like. But in return, you'll have to help me out a little." Kim was so mesmerized that she agreed without even asking what he wanted. Voyez sotundak na hiruki give a criminal dundrai. Yeah, a Chien Sanko. Exactly. That's what MU wanted, an excuse to hand over his assistant. He tossed him up into the air. Dragonling spun in midair and landed right on top of Kim's head. He thought to himself, how could my lord just throw me away like I'm nothing? MU didn't waste any time. MU, chup chup chalalaga piche cigar, Kim kisat rena. Come back on your own later. Still in shock, Dragonling tried to ask, "Master, where are you going without me?" But MU completely ignored him, like he just stumbled onto some new adventure. After a short while, Kim and Dragonling reached her house, and the atmosphere was a bit awkward. Kim was wondering if this lizard might be mad at her for dragging him here by force. Honestly, Dragonling wasn't happy at all, but he still couldn't go against his lord's orders. He let out a long sigh and introduced himself. After a moment, he stretched out his tiny hand and in a slightly formal tone, spoke to Kim. "By my master's orders, from now on you will actively cooperate with me." Kim was a bit stunned. Such a tiny lizard was giving her orders, but his attitude, and the thought that she could now do whatever she wanted with him, made her heart beat faster. Still, not wanting to seem rude, she placed her fingers on his little hand and gave it a light shake as a sign of respect. The moment their hands touched, she asked, "By your master? Do you mean Lee?" Dragonling didn't say anything, but his silence itself confirmed Kim's guess. Taking that as an unspoken yes, Kim nodded and said, "Fine then, if that's what you want, I'm ready to cooperate." Then, with a confident smile, she introduced herself proudly. "By the way, I'm the president of my class." Dragonling squinted in confusion. "What's a president?" he asked, tilting his tiny head. Seeing his confused face, Kim laughed and said, "It means I'm the leader of my class, and not just that. I'm also ranked first in my entire grade." The moment he heard that, Dragonling's eyes almost popped out. "Oh, so that's why my master picked this girl, because she's some big important person." But then another realization hit him like lightning. If this girl is the leader of her class, then that means my lord isn't the leader at all. Bursting with curiosity, Dragonling blurted it out on the spot. "Wait, so that means Lord Lee isn't actually the leader of your class?" Kim went quiet for a moment, lost in thought. Then Lee said, "He doesn't even qualify as an average student in our class. Honestly, he's at rock bottom in everything." Dragonling just froze. He stood there, trying to process that bombshell. And the moment Mu's assistant realized who Kim meant, he yelled in disbelief. He thought Kim was talking about Mu, and that idea just blew his mind. It went down really badly. Nervous, the tiny lizard yelled at the top of his lungs, never once saying his master's name. My master is the most powerful being in the whole world, stronger than any god. He slipped back into his old, intimidating dragon persona and started ordering Kim around. You'll have to go all out so my master can get even stronger and take his revenge. Kim was actually quite impressed by what he said. She felt this tiny lizard had a wild imagination and was genuinely adorable. Amused, she agreed to help, but with one condition. If you want my help, you'll need to visit me a lot, she said playfully. The dragonling paused to think, then happily agreed. He'd already planned to use Kim to gather information, and now he had the perfect excuse on his side to keep meeting her again and again. And with that, the two of them sealed their deal. That tiny servant, who had already risked his life countless times for his lord, was now completely determined to make his master the strongest once more. Meanwhile, Mu was also training with full dedication. Abu Pele basic exercises mehaf nahiraha oskim moves hauki e yortakatwar hoge. As the sun began to set, Mu finally decided he'd done enough training for the day. He jumped down from his spot and checked over his body, clearly satisfied. His body was tougher than before, and he was recovering faster. Excited, he threw a punch, not into the air, but straight at an iron rod. To his surprise, no bones broke, and he didn't feel any pain. For a moment, he felt genuinely proud of himself, but right then, his smile faded. He remembered that he had also come here to look for Kang. With the day nearly done, Mu figured he'd have a better shot at bumping into Kang at school in the coming days. Thinking that, he stepped out onto the road. The moment he did, his sweat-soaked stench spread through the air. If anyone had inhaled it, they'd have dropped on the spot. But as soon as he got close to the neighborhood, his smell had grown so strong that it reached the dragonling's sharp senses. The little lizard, who at that moment was gathering information about Earth with Kim and her PC's help, froze the instant he caught that smell. Without wasting a second, he jumped down. Thanking the girl for her kindness, he left. Now he was acting like an overexcited puppy. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop and over walls, he followed that familiar scent, and in no time reached Mu. With one final jump, he landed on Mu's shoulder, perfectly balanced. Mu was a bit surprised, but the dragonling proudly announced that he had completed his mission. Neither of them realized that in a nearby alley, someone was being beaten up badly. The excited dragonling was telling Mu about his new royal assistant, who had now even sworn loyalty to Mu. But that same excitement distracted Mu, and he failed to notice what was happening around them. As soon as the two moved ahead, the dragonling's sharp nose went on alert again. He caught a familiar scent, the same boy he had been chasing earlier. Kang was beating someone up in the shadows like Batman. But this time, the boy wasn't a bully or a thug. He was a thief who had stolen someone's bicycle. Instead of apologizing, the thief threatened Kang that if he didn't let him go, he'd send someone to teach Kang a lesson. But that very threat became proof for Kang that he'd caught the right guy, and he started hitting even harder. Kang was completely focused and had no idea that behind him, Mu was watching. And seeing him like that made Mu thrilled all over again. But the moment didn't last. Kang sensed danger and instantly turned around. Standing in front of him was that same strange boy who had accepted defeat in their last encounter, yet still refused to stop tailing him. The atmosphere suddenly turned heavy. The only one looking elsewhere was the tiny dragonling, clinging to Mu and insisting they were heading the wrong way. Again and again, again and again. But as always, Mu ignored his loyal companion and kept his full attention on the person he'd been searching for. The moment Mu and Kang's eyes met, a strange tension spread between them. There was resolve in Mu's eyes. Kang halkasa, confused Lagrada. Mu began to move forward, each step deliberate, measured, and studied. Kang tried to explain. This is some kind of misunderstanding, right? Don't come at me like this, he said. But MU didn't care about the little lizard on his shoulder or about Kang's words. Suddenly, MU quickened his pace. It was obvious he was now ready to fight. Kang kept backing away, showing no intention of fighting, at least not until the very last moment. But then he realized that if he didn't defend himself now, things could get really bad. He immediately took a defensive stance, bracing himself to clash with MU. Even though Kang had beaten MU before, this time his hesitation came from something else. He'd realized MU wasn't someone you could just rough up casually like he'd thought before. But for MU, none of that mattered. His body had fully recovered and was far stronger than before. He brimmed with confidence and looked more than ready for another showdown. It felt like the clash could erupt at any second. MU was all set to attack and Kang to defend, but surprisingly Kuchnahua, both of them just froze. Amne Sumne, not moving an inch, standing there completely still. In reality, MU was only acting like he was about to attack. He wanted Kang to throw the first punch so he'd have a proper excuse to officially start the fight. But Kang didn't fall for it. That boxer-type guy standing nearby, who'd been carefully watching MU's every move, was stunned. Seeing this wild-looking guy who'd been chasing him suddenly stop and show zero intention of fighting left him shocked. Right in the middle of that intense standoff, while Kang's full focus was locked on MU, the thief seized his chance and snatched Kang's weapon. Now the weapon was in his hand, and he finally had the perfect excuse to fight. The thief was ready. Yelling in rage, determined to make Kang pay badly for this, he launched himself at Kang. He was going all out to seriously injure Kang, maybe even kill him. But Kang turned out to be way faster than the thief had imagined. He snapped his legs, shifted aside, and dodged right on time. The instant he dodged, Kang realized MU was now standing directly in the path of that weapon. But surprisingly, Kang didn't feel even a bit happy that this annoying kid might get hurt. Instead, he actually felt a little worried for MU, but there was nothing he could do now. It was already too late. On the other side, MU had watched that entire attack from beginning to end with complete focus. He could have easily dodged or blocked it, but he didn't. The truth was, ever since MU had absorbed that magical orb, a burning hunger for battle had taken root inside him. If Kang wasn't going to fight, then who better than this thief? The thief's first hit smashed into MU's head, hard enough to knock someone out, or even kill. But surprisingly, MU only got a tiny scratch. That alone was proof enough. MU now had his excuse to start the fight. He dove at the thief without fear, unleashing a non-stop barrage of punches, striking so fast and hard that the force knocked Kang's weapon out of the thief's hands. The weapon flipped through the air for a moment before MU snatched it mid-fall. Without wasting even a second, MU hooked the weapon from behind around the thief's neck and yanked him toward himself. And in one smooth motion, as soon as the thief came close, MU smashed a merciless headbutt straight into his face, so brutal it hurt just to look at it. MU was clearly enjoying himself. Meanwhile, the thief was almost unconscious from the pain, clutching his head and crying as he screamed, thinking maybe now MU would finally stop. But he was wrong. This was just the beginning. MU started beating him like a punching bag, non-stop punches from every angle. Then he used Kang's weapon too, just to make the beating even more intense and fun. This relentless beating went on until the thief's condition was completely wrecked. He finally collapsed to the ground, trembling in pain, tears streaming from his eyes, crying like a helpless child, while MU stood over him with a satisfied expression, like he'd just taught someone a proper lesson. But that proud little smile didn't last long. MU suddenly realized that one-sided fights are boring. There was no real fun in it, no challenge. He remembered when he first came to Earth and fought Lee's bully, or that other guy, Kiol. How interesting he was. MU decided there was only one opponent worthy of him, Kang. Only Kang and no one else. Right then he remembered he'd come here to fight Kang, not this random thief. When he turned to look for Kang, he was stunned. Kang had already vanished by the time he turned around. Kang used that moment and quietly decided to slip away. Now Kang was once again back on his path, continuing his anti-bully mission. Only one question kept spinning in his head. How does this Barbaroos keep finding him? He had no idea this fight-obsessed looking kid was actually a god. Even so, the gang was so busy trying to stay away from Mew and wipe that crazed, excited face from their minds that they didn't notice the dragonling at all. That tiny lizard had gotten completely distracted by something it saw on the other side, like some new obsession had totally taken over its mind. Right as Kang rushed past, he accidentally kicked the little dragonling hard from behind. The poor thing went flying and crashed far away, but Kang was in such a hurry he didn't even turn around to see who he'd hit or what he'd just sent flying. A little while later, Kang reached home. Garkiender Adehi was near Aram Sautiu Jut Uchal Karutardi. His mind was stuck replaying that pumped-up, freaky face of his that always looked ready to start a fight. Just then, his sister came in from outside and called out in a teasing tone, "The prosecutor has arrived." Kang's 26-year-old sister. After that stalker case, Hina had decided to change her career. Now she'd become a prosecutor. Her goal was to drag cruel criminals into court and make them pay.
Kong और हिना का मकसद एक हाइता तारीख ई अलग दी.
With a playful shove, Hina pushed Kang aside and said, laughing, "How dare you block the path of a great prosecutor?" Kang, oblivious in the way any brother would be, warned her that it wouldn't be good if he had to use his powers. Once things settled down, Hina headed to her room to change, but before going, she called out to Kang, "Make some ramen. There's no other food." Kang stood there, lost in thought, remembering the day his sister was badly injured. Today, Hina was acting so energetic and cheerful that Kang honestly started to wonder if she had really forgotten that incident, or was she just pretending? For Kang, this question was still a mystery, because for him, forgetting that day was impossible. The next day, while everyone was peacefully heading to school, Mew was on his way too, but he didn't have a backpack or even any books. All he had was Kang's weapon, and as always, his little dragonling was perched on his shoulder. The poor thing looked worn out and hurt. It kept apologizing over and over for failing last night, but as usual, Mew wasn't affected by its words at all. Some students passing by, including Lee's bully, stared at the small dragon sitting on Mew's shoulder. Someone wondered if it was a Komodo dragon, but no one had the guts to go closer and check. Dabi Mudian had Gaia. Right in front of him stood Class Pres Kim. The moment she saw her beloved talking lizard, her face lit up with excitement. She literally started bouncing, clearly thrilled that her talking friend had come back. But her happiness didn't last very long. MU quickly reminded her that the time had come for the favors she'd promised him. That's when Kim remembered the deal from when she had borrowed the talking lizard. Back then, she'd agreed to one condition. MU didn't have much information. All he knew about the person he was looking for was this: he wears a mask and protective glasses. But even that tiny hint was enough for Kim. It instantly clicked who MU was talking about. She told MU she'd heard about that boy, a guy who thinks of himself as a bully hunter, and whenever he sees someone bullying anyone, he beats them up on the spot. Unfortunately, the group didn't have much concrete information about Kang, just the same old rumors. That did leave MU a bit disappointed, but even then, he was completely confident that they would definitely meet again, and this time, he wouldn't let Kang slip away so easily. But MU had no idea that the very Kang he was thinking about was already there, secretly watching him from behind. And he wasn't just watching. Kang stepped even closer. Mew and Dragonling's eyes widened when Kang suddenly leaned in and whispered softly, "Stay in your seat. After class, I'll come find you." And with that, Kang casually slid his weapon away and walked past Mew. MU was on edge. On the other hand, he hadn't expected at all that he'd run into Kang again this soon. Everything happened so suddenly that just hearing Kang's voice sent goosebumps racing all over his body. Even so, after all that planning, MU still let Kang walk away without saying a word. Seeing Kang with Lee made Kim suspicious. Were they just friends, or was something going on she didn't know? Who exactly was Kang Binagujani? She was almost about to ask, Am I going high? And kept thinking about that masked boy whose face everyone had seen after class, facing off with Kang, and then watching him walk away so calmly. From that moment until class ended, that hopeful, excited expression never left MU's face. For the first time, it felt like he'd found someone he could genuinely enjoy fighting with. But that was all just an act. On the outside, he looked fine, but underneath the desk, his right leg was shaking so badly he couldn't control it. The one in the worst shape, though, was that poor dragonling, hiding inside MU's pants under that trembling leg, trying to rest while MU's constant shaking made it feel like it was riding out an earthquake. At last, that endless school day was over. Except for the night study group, all the other students were free to go home. Without wasting a second, MU quickly found the class president girl and placed his tiny assistant, that cute little lizard who clearly looked nauseous, into her hands. MU just said, "I've got something urgent to do." Kim happily took it, like this was the best thing that had happened to her all day. She lifted the lizard and walked out of the classroom without asking a single question or doubting him. And she had no idea that if she squeezed the dragonling even a little too hard, it would throw up right there. As soon as Kim left and only Lee remained in the classroom, a hand suddenly appeared from the other side of the room. Of course, it was Kang. He hopped in, announcing his arrival. The moment had finally come. MU and Kang's fight scene. Kang didn't waste any time. He walked straight into the classroom, closed the door, dug into his bag, and pulled out his training gloves. Calm but confident, he started putting the gloves on. MU was a little surprised. Was Kang going to do the same thing again? Like when he wrapped the belt around his hand, but this time, while slipping on the gloves, Kang looked at MU and casually asked, "Do you actually like fighting?" MU shook his head and clearly denied it. "No, I don't fight because I enjoy it," he said. But the truth behind that answer was something else. What he really enjoyed was the pain and shock when someone punched him. For normal people, that would be terrifying. But for Mew, after centuries, that pain had become strangely satisfying. The second thing he loved was the burn in his muscles and that stretch when he pushed past his limits. And the third was that for 300 million years, fighting had been his only way of life. For Mew, fighting wasn't some hobby to feel alive. It was woven into his very existence. And as he thought all this, another overexcited expression spread across his face. Kang paused for a few seconds. He really does seem like a psycho. But instead of overthinking it, Kang pulled another pair of gloves from his bag and tossed them toward MU. He treated this like a friendly spar, not some life or death fight. MU deliberately let the gloves smack him in the face, didn't even flinch, and then caught them in midair. Kang set his bag down in a corner and, with a serious expression, said, "Put the gloves on. I want a fair fight. I only take a fight seriously when my opponent looks above average." MU immediately put the gloves on and rushed toward Kang, his excitement obvious. He threw the first punch, which Kang easily blocked and slipped past. Kang started getting carried away, almost bragging to Mew, but he reined himself in. He checked himself. "I'm here to fight, and that's what this is." A few more punches and blocks later, they both stepped back. That brief pause was all Kang needed to take in the whole situation and reset his focus. Drawing on his pro boxer experience, he reminded himself that first he had to loosen up, keep his body relaxed, and stop his muscles from tensing. This wasn't just about raw power. It was all about control. The moment Kang took his first step, that tiny gap was all MU needed. He rushed in again at high speed, attacking without thinking. But this time, Kang was completely prepared. Not only did he block MU's strike without taking any damage, he used that same opening to drive a solid punch straight into MU's jaw, and Kang didn't stop there. From the opposite side, he followed up with another heavy punch, even stronger than the first. When Kang glanced at his own hand, a wave of satisfaction spread across his face. The power and accuracy of those punches actually impressed him. He was so pleased he wanted to run the exact same sequence on MU again, almost like he was testing whether the technique would work just as cleanly a second time. First, he loosened his muscles, then used the rotational force of his whole body. channeling it through his fists and fingers into MU with full impact. Kang now looked genuinely fired up, like he was eager to give MU a set of painful but very practical boxing lessons. On the other side, MU couldn't help being impressed by Kang's skill. He realized that if he didn't have those body enhancements he'd gotten from that mysterious orb, those punches could have seriously wrecked him. But instead of getting discouraged, MU was even more hyped. Yahidawahi Dade Ki Fadi discovering Tazar Karada Darnak Ardaf, thinking he was fired up and ready to push the fight even further. To him, this felt like a real fight. Meanwhile, on the school's third floor during night self-study, a red-haired boy was dozing off. Achanak uska sharir bikabu kapne laga Jessica Sidaravne sabnemi fans kya ho? Jessica Bode, kya ho? With a jolt, he shot upright, completely confused, like he couldn't even remember where he was. Oshmi etahi uski nazar desbar ignored papati dubil kol dastana nehida. It was basically scolding him for always sleeping in class, and he hadn't even bothered to find out who left the note. He checked the time on his phone and decided it was about time to leave. He snatched up his bag and soon was heading downstairs, on his way out of school. Feeling a bit hungry, the scruffy-looking boy pulled out a snack from somewhere and started eating. But as soon as he reached the second floor, he noticed something odd. A shadow was moving up and down. There was clearly someone in the second-year classroom at this hour, or maybe two people. He couldn't quite tell. That shadow obviously belonged to MU and Kang, still locked in their fierce fight. Right then, MU himself was feeling cornered. He had no option left except to defend, but thinking fast, he came up with an idea. He suddenly lifted his leg and in one powerful motion, slammed it into Kang's chest. As soon as Kang staggered back a little, MU tried to land another kick toward his face. Kang managed to shield his face, but now he was absolutely furious. Kicks are banned in boxing. MU, smirking with confidence and proud of his new tactic, shot back. What are you on about? I don't even know what this box thing is. Before Kang could respond, MU landed another kick on him and mocked him, asking who said only fists were allowed in this fight. The kick was so strong that Kang slid backward. Gujdir de Kang just Hadika and Ekbalko Mukibado bar Yakin Karnalega. Even though he was a trained boxer, Kang was completely unprepared to deal with kicks. MU fully exploited his confusion and slammed in another solid kick. The boxer who'd been in total control just moments ago was now backed into a corner, clinging to a frantic guard to shield himself. Only one question kept looping in Kang's mind. How is a guy who looks this weak throwing kicks this powerful? Kang's whole world shook when MU suddenly switched tactics and aimed a kick at the vital point between his legs. Kang froze on the spot. He had no idea how to react. One thing was clear. If that spot got hit, it was game over. Just like Kang feared, before he could even think of a way out, MU easily landed a kick on that weak point. But the shocking part was that nothing happened. No pain, no reaction at all. MU immediately backed off. He widened the distance between them, but his face still wore that sly, confident grin, as if he was sparing Kang on purpose, when in reality, MU had poured everything he had into that kick. Dragon Linka boost Pura Gaya Bochukata, Jezebel Kapitahine. Realizing this, MU started to panic. He knew that without that boost, he couldn't stand up to Kang Dushraterov, confusing him even more. Kanku Ekbato Klerobeti. He knew a guy like MU never shows mercy to anyone, so why hadn't he finished him off back then? As if struck by some divine insight, Kang smirked with a mocking look and said, "Don't tell me you burned through your power." The CAG had no idea that his random gas acquaintance had turned out to be perfect for him. Mubaz Takchugatha, or Apnea Limit Barda, he had absolutely no clue about any extra power buff from Dragon Link. MU didn't say a word, just kept acting normal, as if Kang's words were complete nonsense. But in Kang's head, the whole puzzle had finally come together. Thinking that, he burst out laughing loudly. Right after that intense fight, MU looked like he had no idea what to do next. The red-haired boy at the back of the classroom just kept watching everything. Dobi Dangeler Kalar Taylor Chok Madi Manu quick comedy Shocha Rao. For him, this scene wasn't entertaining. It was irritating. Kijia ki socha taimne. Barbat karega. Dut ke nikal gaya. Ye julu sabanda. Strong hair. Ye skilled clear. Nahida. But watching Kang and MU fight just made him feel disgusted. The moment the boy walked out, Kang stopped laughing. His face turned serious, and he charged straight at MU. This was the perfect chance to turn the situation in his favor. MU was now in a really bad spot. He swung his leg up to block Kang's punch, or at least slow it enough to stop. But that simple plan didn't work. Instead of punching MU in the face, Kang went for a vital spot that MU himself had carelessly left wide open. MU had thought his knee would act as a solid defense, but he was dead wrong. With just one strike, not only did he feel a sharp pain, but balancing on one leg made his body spin almost 90 degrees. It gave Kang a perfectly clean opening. Kang didn't waste even a second and unleashed a bone-crushing punch. MUK silver mukabale, itni zor se takraniki wokai meter or kar di war se takraya or girgaya. Even then, he didn't black out. Leaning against the wall, MU kept thinking that without that enhancement buff, there was no way he could stand up to Kang's solid, muscular body. That's when one last desperate idea suddenly hit him. If he could use even a little bit of his original mana, his inner energy, maybe he'd still have a chance to win. He tried many times and failed. Even so, he decided he should at least give it a shot. Ahir namum kinko trikarna bi harman sito bitarhe, yimudkar kayalhua, or himat jodkar sara, dayan jama karke usne matime zara. CB magic ki technique ki koshish ki. Clinging to that hope, he charged at Kang again, this time relying on his non-existent magic. But to Kang, it was just a kid's punch. He easily caught Mu's fist in midair. Seeing the opening, Kang mocked Mu again with a smug grin. His face was a bit more animated now, but that real thrill still wasn't there. Then suddenly Kang felt something strange, like some kind of energy or wave-like sensation passing through his body. That was exactly the moment MU needed. He didn't waste even a second, and the instant Kang's guard dropped, he drove another punch straight into his face. Even so, Kang only felt a bit dizzy before snapping out of it. His focus came back completely. Kang grabbed MU's other hand, but again he felt an even stronger wave of energy surge through his body, shooting toward his back. On instinct, he turned around again. Magic or whatever, it didn't matter. What mattered was that MU fully exploited that opening. This time, he went with his most reliable weapon, his head. MU's headbutt was so brutal that Kang was sent flying, slammed straight into the classroom door, and then crumpled there, completely knocked out. MU now stood over him, chest puffed out, a proud look on his face. He wondered if his little mana plan had actually worked, or if he was just imagining things. After a short while, MU finally realized that somehow he'd managed to reroute a bit of mana through his body and channel a little magic into his fist in a new way he'd never even tried before. But honestly, the rush of getting the magic to work was nothing compared to the thrill of getting payback on Kang. MU's lips curled up like a starving caveman who'd suddenly laid eyes on a royal feast after years. He walked up to Kang's unconscious face, but he wasn't planning anything overly dramatic or insane, just his usual style. He wanted to leave his mark, but right at that moment, fate decided to wake Kang up, and his ear was spared. The moment Kang came to, he realized MU had probably been about to mark him like his other victims. But Kang wasn't some random guy. He was a champion boxer, and he wasn't about to let that happen. He immediately shoved MU away and, steadying himself, pushed himself up to his feet. He was still a bit woozy, but his resolve to stop MU was back. Kang quickly accepted that he'd underestimated MU and admitted defeat, but that didn't mean he was going to let him rip his ear off. He probably wanted to say something to MU about that weird sensation he'd felt right before blacking out, but his spinning head and bleeding nose wouldn't let him string together a single clear thought. So he tossed out a quick excuse and bailed, figuring the sooner he put some distance between himself and MU, the better. Watching Kang leave, MU felt a twinge of disappointment. He'd been sure Kang would be added to his list of playthings today, but it looked like that chance just wasn't coming. After a while, Kim Eugene's at home, little Dragon Link was pinned under a huge bag. A bag so big, it looked almost twice his own size. He was drenched in sweat without having taken a single step. That bag already had everything inside, either what his master had ordered or what he bought on his own. With no other choice, Dragon Link steeled himself and started heading back. Instead of taking the easy route, he chose to move across the rooftops. As he was running toward Lee's house, he spotted Camp in the distance, still clutching his injured face and staggering along. The moment he saw him, Dragon Link remembered this was the same boy who had kicked him on the ass for no reason last time. Now was his chance for revenge, and he wasn't about to let it slip. He immediately dropped his bag, climbed onto it, crouched down, and launched himself toward Kang like a bullet. He was aiming for a clean headbutt straight to Kang's face, just like his master had done. But luck wasn't on his side today, not even in this injured state. Kang spotted him at the very last second and instinctively threw a punch that smacked the poor lizard right out of the air for a few seconds. Camp himself was baffled. He couldn't figure out what kind of weird creature had just attacked him. He thought about giving Dragon Link a proper beating, but in his own condition, he couldn't even walk straight. He just shook his head, grumbled something low, and limped off home. Abhi use sirf aaram chahiye tha. As soon as Kag disappeared, someone else showed up, and it was none other than MU. He stood there, staring at Dragon Link's battered body lying on the ground. He was wondering whether this thing was alive or dead, and what exactly was inside that bag. Next morning, MU was headed to school again, this time with one clear difference. He had on a fresh school uniform and a new backpack, with Dragon Link sitting comfy at the back inside. Instead of clinging to MU's shoulder or sneaking under his clothes, he now sat snug in the backpack, feeling way more at ease and safe. Dragon Link proudly announced that this new uniform and backpack had been bought by Kim Eugene, his royal and reliable assistant, just to make him happy. Dragon Link really liked his new home and declared that he would live there from now on and wouldn't attract unnecessary attention. Meanwhile, Kang was walking on the other side of the street. The moment he saw MU, he came over to him and, curious, asked why MU was wearing a school uniform on a Saturday. MU, emotionless and casual, replied, "What's Saturday?" For a moment, Kang was confused, and maybe a little irritated too. It felt like MU was messing with him again, but he avoided getting into an argument. Instead, he brought up what he hadn't managed to say the previous day. Kang asked MU again if he really liked fighting, and MU repeated the same answer. "I fight because I have to." It was hard for Kang to believe that, especially after the energy and excitement he'd seen on MU's face the day before. But even then, he didn't complain. Instead, he got straight to the point and told MU that he wanted to spend time with him. "If you're with me, I won't have to go looking for fights, and I won't be bored." Hearing this, MU's whole body started trembling with excitement, and that same scary but thrilled smile appeared on his face again. Kang didn't need any words from MU. Everything was written clearly on his expression. MU doesn't easily change his opinion of someone, but somehow Kang had managed to do it. Everything seemed perfectly fine until MU suddenly said, "Take me to fight someone right now." Kang froze for a second, then calmly explained that he didn't mean fighting right this moment. He was talking about the future. Dragon Link was secretly listening to this entire conversation from inside the bag, hidden away, and maybe planning revenge for losing to Kang twice. Friday morning. At school, one of the ex-students was blocking the bathroom door so no one could get in. He wasn't letting anyone go inside, no matter how badly they needed it. Inside the restroom, a big guy was interrogating another student. "How much money did you make?" The boy he was questioning was the same thief Mew had beaten up badly last time. Nervously, the kid pulled out a bit of cash and stammered that it was just 20,000 won. The big guy, whose build was just like MU's original form Marisala, was named Young Joe, and he looked like the top bully of the school. The smaller guy, clearly Young Joe's lackey, started crying. He said Kang had interfered and wrecked their whole plan. They still had no idea who Kang really was. The moment young Joe heard Kang's name, something snapped in his head. He smashed a heavy punch into the wall, his face flushing red with frustration. But tracking down Kang wasn't going to be easy, so he immediately ordered his lackey to round everyone up. The hunt for Kang had begun. Cut to Saturday evening. MU and Kang are walking together through the streets. Out of nowhere, Kang starts opening up. I used to fight for no reason. I'd just spot some thug and beat him up. But ever since he met MU, he'd started to genuinely enjoy fighting with a purpose and while keeping himself under control. MU joked, "So instead of hunting thugs alone, we'll both enjoy it together." Kang laughed and shot him down. MU wasn't on his hit list, but Kang promised that one day they'd have a proper rematch. Just then, MU spotted smoke in the distance. Kang noticed it too, and after sniffing the air, he spoke up. "Smells like cigarette smoke. A bunch of people are smoking together." Without wasting time, he pulled on his mask and glasses and knew they'd just found their first target of the day. Using that fat smoke screen, Kang slid in quiet. 2 boys guarded the alley mouth, the rest chilling inside. One of the boys noticed Kang, but figured he was just some random passerby. "Cocky," he said, "take out your wallet and hand it over." That was all Kang needed to be sure they'd pick the right targets. Without hesitating, he drove his fist into the guy's face. The other kid clocked him right away as Kang. This was that same famous bully hunter, Jesus Nichile, under Valley Ongai Taraf Moji Kang. Kang was thrown for a moment. He hadn't expected such a big gang. But then he remembered he wasn't alone. He called out to MU right away. MU had already pulled on a jacket to hide his face and was flushed with excitement, but he still couldn't move. And it wasn't because he was scared. Whenever he got this hyped, he needed someone else to swing first before he could start. Right then, the boy who had hit Kang walked up to MU, grabbed his leg, and asked, "You with him or what?" For MU, that was enough. He took that as the first attack and finally dove into the fight. Within just a few minutes, MU and Kang gave those thugs a proper beating. But MU ended up disappointed. These guys turned out to be really weak. Dumoke main, hey sablatage. Kanko shikayat naiti. He was satisfied. Just then, he spotted a small bag on the ground. He quickly picked it up and handed it back to its owner. The owner was a red-haired girl who looked completely shaken and helpless. But she wasn't a stranger. Kang recognized her instantly. She was his classmate, the one he secretly liked. Before Kang could say anything to her, a few more boys showed up. Dragon Link tried to warn them, but MU was already on edge. These weren't random guys. Bite Shuru. Honsapele Heun Mi se ek thug message chalachukatha. That gang spotted message had reached young Joe, and now young Joe had shown up with his entire crew, ready to punish Kang for wrecking their so-called business. The gang had figured out what was going on. Now it was time to get serious. Without any hesitation, he pulled out his weapon and got ready to keep the fight going. On the other side, Mu's disappointed face flipped completely into excitement when he realized the fight wasn't over yet. The real fun was just about to start. At young Joe's command, his entire gang rushed MU and Kang at once, dead set on taking them down no matter what. Kang and MU both stood there calmly, just waiting for someone to make the first move. But MU couldn't hold back his emotions. The thought of an all-out brawl thrilled him to the core. He got so hyped that drool started dripping uncontrollably from his mouth. MU didn't wait for anyone's answer. The moment they stepped in front of him, he dropped them one by one with a single punch each, like he was playing some game. He flat out dropped 3 guys cold. But just when he thought it couldn't get any more fun than this, a heavy slab smashed right into his face. And yeah, it was none other than young Joe. With one effortless move, young Joe caught him off guard and slammed him into the ground. Furious, young Joe demanded, "Why are there 2? As far as he knew, there was supposed to be only one. A short walk from the chaos, red-haired Asian, still grossed out from watching MU and Kang throw down yesterday, was walking by, grumbling to himself about why no one was answering his calls. But after a few more steps, the sounds of a fight caught his attention. Curiosity got the better of him, and he went to see what was happening. What he saw was a complete mess. A bunch of boys were brawling with each other like a herd of wild goats. Just like last, watching the scene, that old disgust surged back up, and he was about to turn away when he spotted the girl in the corner, Kang planted in front of her, ready to protect her with everything he had. And in that moment, Heijin just froze. The sight of that girl hit him so hard that all the anger he'd been holding back exploded at once. The root of Hajun's hatred for fighting went back to his childhood, when his dad was an MMA champion. To Hajun, his father was everything. He respected him, admired him, and believed he was the strongest person in the world. He saw his father as a hero. But everything started to change when his father began taking illegal drugs to boost his strength. Sharum Badlov Nialaga, but Dire Sabhatsin Nikhal Gaya. His father became addicted, and those drugs started messing with his mind too. Back then, Heijin was very young. He didn't really understand what drugs or addiction were. But slowly, the image of his hero began to crumble. Their home turned into a living nightmare. One day, his mother, who had been beaten over and over, finally ran away just to save her own life, but she had to flee without her kids. He was left there with his little sister, the one he had to protect. There was no way out, no one to help, but he refused to give up. He turned himself into a shield for his sister. He took every beating himself so that she would stay safe. But deep down, he knew life couldn't go on like this. One day, he decided he would escape this hell. He started watching his father's fights over and over again. He carefully learned all his moves and techniques. He practiced in secret. Years passed, and Heijin grew to be as big as his father. Egden Bapi Baha Tapajardia, Dupeli Bar Hajin Nebi Bina Rukto Gosajardia. He had endured everything, but not anymore. By then, he had become strong enough to stop him. His father was stunned. For the first time, Hajin stood up to him head-on, but that only drove his father into an even worse rage. In the rage, he said something that made Hajun's soul tremble. "Not just you anymore. I'll kill my sister too." That was the moment Heijin snapped. Overcome by a surge of fury and terror, he crossed a line he'd never even imagined he could. He killed his father. Yes, Heijin had taken a life, but the court recognized the circumstances. They gave him just 1 year in juvenile detention. When he got out and went back to school, though, nothing about his life was easy. Even in class, he was grinding non-stop, doing whatever it took to earn money and look after himself and his sister. Getting sick or hurt just wasn't on the table. His body was the only asset he had. So watching guys like Meng and Kang hurl themselves into fights without a second thought made his skin crawl. But this time, everything was different. Now he couldn't look away. Ignoring it wasn't possible anymore because that girl's safety was on the line, and that girl was his sister. Yes, her name was Dao Jun, and she still had no idea that her brother was standing so close by. He'd wondered how she'd ended up in this mess, but that didn't matter anymore. Now there was only one thing that mattered: keeping her safe. The girl was unaware, but young Joe wasn't paying attention to anyone either. He was just confused about one thing. Why were there 2 bounty hunters this time? Too bad Monk was already sprawled out on the ground, completely unconscious. Dragonlink, shaking, was desperately trying to wake his master. And then there was Jada Arab, that ugly bounty hunter. Right then, a shadow suddenly appeared from behind. With a sharp, lightning-fast strike, Heijin hit young Joe right in his weak spot. Blindsided, young Joe collapsed to his knees. He froze, stunned that someone had dared to hit him from behind. But that was only the beginning. Hajin grabbed his head one-handed and slammed his face into the floor with full force. The big guy crumpled, no longer a threat to Dragonlink. Jan Lagakar, Munko Milani, Majorada. The noise kept swelling. But before Dragonlink could even finish, Hajin had already blown past him. He didn't touch him. He just stepped over and pushed on. Mind locked on getting to his sister fast. Kang felt someone behind him a moment later, but he couldn't tell who this guy was or why he'd shown up. But what threw him off even more was how, in the blink of an eye, Heijin took down 2 cops like they were nothing. Now only 2 thugs were left, and before they could react, Heijin was already in front of them, grabbed their stunned faces, and smashed both their heads against the nearby walls. Then he stepped up to Kang, fixed him with a cold, deadly, serious stare, and told him they'd crossed a line that should never even be imagined. Kang instantly realized Heijin wasn't like the other thugs. He was clearly here for that girl. Flustered, Kang tried to explain the whole situation to him, but before he could get a word out, Daljun shouted. Brother Kang froze. By now, it honestly felt like Daljun and this boy had to be siblings. Their faces alone made it obvious, but before Kang could think any further, Heijin seized the opening and struck. Kang was a champion boxer. His reflexes were razor sharp, so he instinctively threw a wild punch to protect himself. But Heijin slipped past it with ease and caught a clean opening. Yet instead of throwing a punch or a kick, he just set his hand on Kang's shoulder and gave him a hard shove. Kang stumbled, but he wasn't hurt. Without wasting a second, Heijin grabbed the trembling Daljun's hand and said, "Get a grip and run with me." They took off, but Daljun had barely run a few steps when her small blue wallet slipped from her hand and dropped to the ground. She didn't even notice, and Heijin had no time to point it out, because an even bigger threat was now standing in their way. Young Joe. This time, he was seriously pissed off. He stood there, blocking the mouth of the alley. Fire burned in his eyes as he roared. "Who the hell are you people, and why did you wreck everything?" Hajunki passed Nawat to Sunka Najab command. He just wanted to get out of there. But before Heijin could move, someone else stepped up and smashed a heavy punch straight into young Joe's face. It was Mung. He was fully back to his senses now, and seeing an opening, he struck. Hajin still hadn't noticed Mung, so for a moment he was thrown off. Who the hell was this guy, and where did he pop out from? No time to think about it. Hajin grabbed the chance and bolted with his sister Daljun. Meanwhile, back in the fight, Mung was overjoyed, not just to take hits, but to finally land a few of his own. Kang snapped at him. "Why did you show your face? Now you've made yourself an easy mark for everyone." On the other side, young Joe was barely holding himself up. Dizzy and staggering, he lifted his head and saw the two of them running off in the distance. He couldn't stop them, couldn't even give chase, and that realization made the fury inside him explode. Spitting out filthy curses, he snarled, "I'll track them down again, and when I do, I'll rip every last one of them apart." The scene cuts to a few hours later. Kang had sketched a simple drawing of young Joe. He was explaining to Mung who this guy really was and what they needed to do next. According to Kang, young Joe was one of the most notorious delinquents in the whole area. And it wasn't just him. There were two others on his level. Haesik from one school and Kim Chung-yu from another. The three of them together were known by one name, Godorori. Each one ruled the delinquent scene at his own school. Mung didn't even know the other two, and for now, Kang didn't want to get into them either. He was just trying to lay out the whole situation for Mung Gangbola. But ever since young Joe showed up, everything had flipped. Things had gotten so bad that under Godori's command, people were openly extorting others in broad daylight. Kang also mentioned that the boys they'd fought earlier, before young Joe arrived, were probably part of the Godori gang, but they weren't directly under young Joe himself. Based on everything he'd seen and put together so far, Kang was sure young Joe was the real boss of the gang, which was why he acted with so much authority. Kang went through all of this slowly and in detail, but Mung still just stared blankly, like he hadn't understood a single word Kang had said. "Bro, run that again. This delinquent and extortion stuff isn't clicking for me at all." When Mung also asked, "And what does Godori even mean?" Kang finally snapped. He barked. "Do you even have a brain? Or is it just there for decoration?" Right then, Dragon Link stepped out from his hiding spot, unable to stand there while his master got insulted. Kang was completely stunned. He had absolutely no idea what Dragon Link was supposed to be, and his sudden appearance threw Kang totally off. Kang stared at him, baffled, and muttered under his breath, "How the hell is a frog talking?" Naturally, Dragon Link hated being called a frog, since in his mind he was still a mighty dragon. Mung, still in full chill mode, introduced him as his assistant, or maybe something like a friend, which only made everything feel even more awkward and absurd. Now, Kang was starting to have some very serious doubts about Meng. Meng was so utterly clueless, he didn't even know the days of the week. Seeing this, Kang began to suspect he might not understand even the simplest things. His assistant was now a frog that walked and talked. Kang adapted fast, that he'd landed himself in some seriously weird mess. MU was secretly a bit impressed that a plain old human like CAG had already figured out he wasn't originally human. Then both of them spoke at the exact same time. Kang bluntly asked, "Are you an alien?" And MU casually replied, "I'm God." But Kang didn't see even a hint of any godly aura in MU. And proving just how clueless he was, MU immediately asked, "What does alien mean?" He genuinely had no idea what an alien was. This whole hilarious back and forth was happening in President Kim's house. She was also wondering why these people were even here. On top of that, she was being forced to sit there and stitch MU's torn shirt. After a while, her irritated expression softened a bit when Dragon Link quietly came and sat by her feet and started playing with her phone. Now, CAG tried to dumb things down for MU's tiny brain. He said, "Whether you're a god or an alien, for now our target is still that guy who slapped you, knocked you down, and then you punched him." Kang was clearly pinning all the blame on young Joe for everything that had happened to Kag, and the moment he remembered Kag's condition, CAG's blood started boiling with rage. MU finally understood who they needed to focus on. Ajib takiasli lele kikialse, MU ko ajib si kushi horeithi. Even getting beaten up by young Joe felt like a weirdly special experience to him, but deep down, MU knew the truth. He knew he couldn't beat young Joe in a proper, fair fight, especially in his current state. The size difference alone made it a tough challenge. Yet, MU started getting excited again. Just the thought of fighting someone stronger than him felt like the best kind of challenge. But the very next moment, reality smacked him in the face. Right now, he could get dropped all over again. He knew he would have to train a lot more. Way more than he had up till now. Kang agrees. He says MU isn't ready for young Joe yet and should come train at his gym, but MU shoots him down on the spot. He's not into Kang's training vibe. It's just bare-knuckle brawling, nothing more. MU feels he needs something completely different, training that's way more intense, more varied, and a lot rougher. Right then, Dragon Link, who'd been messing around with Kim's phone, suddenly lit up. He hopped right up in front of Mu's face and said, "I found exactly what you were looking for." Turned out it was some online video of a challenge happening in an underground arena. On screen was an undefeated fighter with a 13-win streak, a guy who usually finished his opponents in just a few seconds. The girl streaming the fight was like, "So, who's got the guts to take this guy on?" And then things got even juicier. She announced that whoever wins will walk away with $1,000,000. Now, MU and Kag leaned in and watched the video properly, actually listening to every word the girl said. But what really hooked them was the moment CAG recognized that undefeated fighter. MU double-checked with him. So he's a member of the Ghidorah gang. And just to be sure, he asked CAG again. "So you're saying he's from the same gang you told me about before?" Kag nodded. Yeah, and just that much info was enough for MU. His next target was set. He was going to use this chance to train himself. First, he'd beat young Joe. Then he'd take down the Ghidorah gang one by one. All that chaos was happening down on Earth, but up in the Divine Realm, things were way more serious. A massive, over-the-top magical attack was hammering away at God's domain. The attack was so overwhelming that anyone could tell with just one look who was behind it. This was Lucifer's handiwork. He was all in, burning all his power to smash Earth's barrier. Somehow he needed a gap to finish MU. This time, he'd pushed himself past even his own limits. He was dead sure he'd finally managed to put a crack in that barrier. And if he didn't cash in on this moment while MU was still weak, then MU Kitakat Lortihi could end up becoming the death warrant for Lucifer himself. As the smoke and dust around the mini-Earth slowly began to clear, Lucifer's eyes stayed locked on it, desperately waiting for the result. But what he saw was hard to accept. The mini-Earth was completely unharmed. Even after Lucifer's ultimate move, there wasn't a single scratch on its barrier. He'd considered this possibility, but even then, he couldn't swallow this defeat. He'd been so sure the barrier should have shattered by now. Arjabsu wodi nyadaya. Jebosne sirf ungli chuka karhaski dunia ki barrier todi thi ar usbad surat ladke ko andardas tura fektiata. Jisekoi bakar katra ho. Yahi baat Lucifer ko kaye jarhithi. Ke uski ijazat ke bina cheezing horihi. Ar ye dekar uske dimag mein kya chal raha hoga. Chehe jitni bhi jaan lagale. Lucifer's barrier ke saath kuch kar nahi pa raha tha. Ar yain se uska asli dard shuru hone wala tha. Down on Earth, young Joe wasn't in much better shape. Inside, he was burning with anger, just like Lucifer, barely managing to hold himself together. Maybe to cool himself down a bit, he started slamming punches and kicks into the door in front of him. At the same time, he was shouting and cursing the bully hunters who had beaten him so badly and humiliated him. He just stood there, trying his best not to think about any of it. But then suddenly he realized the door he was attacking was actually a bathroom door, and some poor guy was trapped inside. That guy was in a terrible state. Out of sheer terror, he lost control of himself 3 times before he finally managed to figure out what was going on outside. When he finally came out of the public restroom, completely drained and defeated, there was only one thought spinning in his head. Some nobodies had beaten him up and insulted him, and the worst part was that he hadn't gained a single thing from that whole day. Right outside, a small boy, the same one who'd been with him earlier, was waiting for him, trying to act a bit cool. He pulled something out of his pocket, a blue wallet that young Joe must have dropped by mistake. Young Joe snatched the wallet from him and shook it hard to check what was inside. As soon as a few coins clinked out, young Joe just snapped. He thought that Chota Sachor was straight up making fun of him. But he didn't notice that along with the wallet, Daljun's ID card had also fallen to the ground. A school ID card with his photo, full name, and school printed on it. Young Joe picked up the card and started examining it carefully. Within a few seconds, his mood flipped entirely. A sly smile spread across his face. He realized that with this information, he could finally get his revenge on those bully hunters. That's where that day's story cuts off, without any neat explanation. The next morning, MU and Dragon Link were walking down the street. Dragon Link was reading a map President Kim had given them and was leading MU along the route. It seemed like MU was heading toward the same arena Dragon Link had shown him in that video. A little while later, just as a man with his dog was about to pass by them, Dragon Link accidentally let out a tiny fart. Neither MU nor the man noticed anything. Both of them just kept walking like normal, but nothing gets past a dog's sharp nose. The moment that fart smell hit his nose, the dog completely snapped. He went totally out of control and started rampaging. No idea what was in that gas, but it was so potent that the dog instantly leapt at Dragon Link and clamped its teeth hard into his backside. It was like the dog was handing down punishment. Jesse Garajo Janoni Hargat Fermat Karna Nayakar Kutta Shantogia. But Dragon Link got a lesson he was never going to forget. The two of them glared at each other and then went their separate ways. Dragon Link was baffled. He just couldn't figure out why he'd been attacked over something so tiny. He decided the dog was insane and, in his head, swore that one day, somehow, he'd get his revenge. A few minutes later, following Dragon Link's directions, they finally arrived at their destination. The same little girl from the video was sitting at a table, checking each participant, deciding who was allowed to enter the fight and who would be turned away. When MU's turn came, the girl immediately noticed he was a high school kid. It was obvious from his school uniform. She even recognized his school, but just to be sure, she asked, "Am I right?" Before MU could answer, Dragon Link whispered from his hiding spot, "Yeah, say yes, just agree." And as usual, clueless MU went along with Dragon Link and said yes. Then the girl asked her next question. "What kind of fighting experience do you have that makes you qualified to enter the arena?" MU had no idea what she meant, so the girl explained again. "Any background works, like boxing, wrestling, martial arts, or street fighting." Now, MU understood. He paused to think, started counting on his fingers like he was doing some huge calculation, and then, with Dragon Link's help and using every last bit of his brain power, he proudly said, Teen million sal seher jagala rahun.
Yisante hai biche kiri log haste luput hoge. Subko laga bevakof mazakarai.
Parlad kikomu weapon banan kai dia pasandaya are usne fight mena laukia. Now the girl asked for an entry fee of 50,000 won, and from behind MU, Dragon Link pulled out the cash and handed it over. If you're wondering where that money popped out from, it's obvious. That sneaky lizard is a pro thief who milked Kim's trust and swiped her wallet. They'd managed to pull it off, but since neither Moon nor Dragon Link could count money properly, they didn't even realize they only had 46,000 and were about 4,000 short of the full amount. Luckily, the girl took a liking to Moon, gave him a discount, and let them in. Once everything was sorted, Moon stepped aside so the next guy could come up for the interview. Just as Moon was about to leave, something caught his eye, making him stop and turn back. There was this big guy in a green hat and jacket, casually leaning against some kind of column or lamppost. Moon stared at him for a few seconds, fixated on the boy's build and presence. His muscles were so big and so sharply defined that Moon got it instantly. This guy wasn't some random kid. He was clearly a serious fighter, even though Moon still hadn't seen his face. Just from his physique, Moon felt this was probably the same guy the gang had mentioned, that Godori guy. Now Moon was completely locked onto him. But the weird thing was, even though he stood out so much, the boy seemed totally oblivious to everything around him. After a while, the event was about to start, and that was when the boy finally showed his face. And that's where the twist came in. The boy was actually a girl, or maybe a boy who looked way too much like a girl. The tiny streamer girl kicked things off, hyping the undefeated champ before announcing the match. She and the announcer girl stood in the center of the arena, with everyone else spread out in a ring around them. The announcer girl, buzzing with energy, shouted out the champion's name. Whistle blows, a fighter with 13 straight wins to his name. And then, as always, in wandered Moon, totally clueless. He walked forward acting all confident, like this fight was his and his alone. He had absolutely no idea this wasn't some one-on-one showdown with the champion. Moon marched right into the middle of the arena, dropped into a fighting stance, and announced that he was ready to start. Seeing this, everyone was stunned, even the announcer girl. Moon, with that goofy grin on his face, had no idea everyone was staring at him. He puffed out his chest and boldly said, "Let's start the fight now." And this time, he wasn't going to wait for someone else to hit first. In his head, Moon was going to launch the opening attack himself. In his head, standing in the middle automatically meant both sides were ready. But before he could do anything, that little girl sprinted over and cut him off. Her face was full of disbelief, like she honestly thought Moon was about to wreck the entire event. She rolled her eyes and broke it down for him, since his IQ clearly wasn't high enough to get it himself. She pulled a small piece of paper from her tiny pocket and, waving it in front of Moon, explained that he had to follow the rules. He couldn't just walk in and call out the champ. The paper showed the whole tournament bracket. Everyone had to fight their own matches first, and then the winners would keep advancing until only one champion was left. Moon finally gave in and started playing along about an hour later. By then, 3 fights had already finished and their winners were decided. Now it was Moon's turn. Moon was standing in his spot. He'd been waiting this whole time, just for this moment. His opponent was none other than the same guy whose dog had earlier gone for Dragon Link's ass. The host girl tried once again to crank up the hype and introduced Moon. This is Moon, who claims he's a fighter with 3 million years of experience. Yeah, nobody believed that for a moment. Then she introduced Moon's opponent, an expert in Chinese martial arts, a calm and disciplined fighter, the complete opposite of his wild dog. Dragon Link was watching the match from a distance. His eyes were shining with excitement as people started placing bets on the fighters. He felt proud that his lord's match was finally about to begin. But then his attention drifted. On the other side, a dog was barking non-stop, so loud it was drowning out even the crowd's excitement. Dragon Link felt like he'd seen that dog's face somewhere before. After a moment, he remembered. This was the same dog that had bitten him right in the ass. That painful memory lit his anger on fire. Dragon Link dropped down from his hiding spot like a bird, and in the very next instant, he hit the ground, not clumsy like some lizard, but landing smoothly like a seasoned master. He touched down right next to Moon, who jumped in surprise. What was going on now? But Dragon Link was furious. He didn't even bother answering Moon's question. Every bit of his attention was locked onto that dog. It was like the two of them were talking with their minds, and Dragon Link had just challenged the dog to a fair fight. And the crazy part was, the dog actually understood. It shook its head hard, slipped out of its collar, and shoved its way through the crowd straight into the middle of the arena. Only then did the Chinese fighter realize everyone had been talking about his dog. He had no clue why his pet had suddenly charged and so fired up. Everyone else was stunned, but the host girl lit up with excitement. She turned the whole thing into a rare double battle event. Owners versus owners, and pets versus pets. And yes, once again, this was all just to boost stream views, this time in an even more over-the-top way. The little girl introduced Moon as a 3033000, a fighter with 3 million years of experience, and presented his opponent as an international student of Chinese martial arts. She titled the second part of the showdown, New-Tailed Little Lizard versus Chinese Crazy Dog. For a moment, the Chinese boy and everyone else just stared at Dragon Link, taking in his horns and wings, and trying to figure out what they were even looking at. Everyone was confused, but before anyone could get any answers, the little girl yelled at the top of her lungs, "The fight's about to begin!" Trying his best to stay polite and now a bit more confident, the Chinese boy started explaining his technique. He said it was an ancient style that imitates the movements of animals. He shaped his fingers into the claws of a wild beast and declared that no unarmed human could stand against this technique. Then, brimming with confidence, he charged at Moon and warned him not to take him lightly. But Moon stood there, calm and unbothered, like nothing was happening. In a flash, the boy closed the distance and slashed at Moon with his claw-like hands, convinced his tiger style was unbeatable. Unfortunately for him, Moon moved in a blur and drove a heavy punch straight into his stomach. The Chinese boy wanted to scream from the pain, but no sound came out. He dropped to the floor in shock, and that's when it hit him. He'd been the one underestimating Moon the whole time, and now he was paying for it. Right then and there, Moon called his martial arts into question. No matter how much you copy animal movements, a human body still has its limits. Those moves can be read and blocked. The Chinese boy slowly tried to get back on his feet. Just one punch from Moon had rattled his entire system. For a moment, he realized his opponent was no ordinary kid. Moon felt like a concrete wall, solid and immovable. Still, he flat out refused to lose. He chose to go all in on this. As a last resort, he chose a technique his master had strictly forbidden him from ever using on a human. All of a sudden, the Chinese boy, whose name nobody even knew until now, put one hand on the ground, then the other, leaving Moon a little confused. Moon started wondering what he was planning now. Right when Moon's fight finally got fun, the crowd's attention wandered off. Dragon Link versus the dog. Or Dragon Link, already completely out of strength, was desperately trying to figure out how to handle this crazy dog. But before he could think of anything, the dog lunged at him again. From its body language, it looked like the dog only wanted to go for Dragon Link's again. But that wasn't all. Moon's assistant was still thinking when the dog suddenly stopped itself, spread its legs in a ninja stance, and then, boom. The moment it pulled that ninja move, everyone felt like there were suddenly 3 dogs in front of them at once. Not just Dragon Link, the entire audience, even the streamer girl, were stunned. Everyone started wondering if this was some kind of trained ninja dog. And from there, things only got worse for Dragon Link. The dog unleashed an illusion of 173 attacks. Dragon Link braced himself to defend, convinced the dog in the middle was the real one. He went for that one. But guess what? The real dog was actually the one on the left, which seized the moment and sank a brutal bite into Dragon Link's neck. The poor demigod let out a loud scream. As soon as the dog let go, the streamer girl called it out for the viewers. Tonight belonged to the dog's explosive victory. The crazy Chihuahua mutt wasn't done yet. It was already gearing up to attack again. Now the camera cut back to its owner. The Chinese boy was in a position like he was about to do push-ups, but he wasn't actually working out. He dropped into a pose straight out of a four-legged animal, swapping into a whole new technique right in front of Moon. And without wasting a second, he sprinted toward Moon, fully locked in on his target. Moon was still just standing there, relaxed, completely calm and unfazed by the Chinese boy. And when they saw that slightly goofy-looking technique, the crowd burst out laughing. I mean, what even is this style supposed to be? The Chinese boy's master was there too. No one could tell if it was really him or just his spirit watching. But one thing was obvious. He absolutely hated that his student was using the very move he'd forbidden, and doing it in front of a crowd, no less. The Chinese boy, though, couldn't care less about the crowd or his master. All he cared about was beating MU. And finally, a flicker of emotion crossed MU's face. He tried to read the kid's next move and how to stop it, but before he could finish, the Chinese boy suddenly leaped into the air. He jumped straight at MU, attacking with his tiger paw technique. This time, MU was genuinely caught off guard, because just a moment ago he'd been focused on the boy's low stance, and now suddenly there was this aerial assault. The Chinese boy actually got right up to MU's face and slashed at him like a tiger. For a second, he felt like he'd carved MU's face into 5 crooked, jagged strips. At least, that's how it felt to him after that leaping strike. When he landed a short distance away, he turned to look. MU was hunched over, clutching his face in pain. Then MU took his hand away and realized he'd seriously underestimated this kid. If the boy had real claws instead of fingernails, MU's face would have been shredded beyond recognition. In reality, the attack had only left 4 shallow scratches on MU's face. But the fight was just getting started, and his opponents had no intention of letting him off easy. The Chinese boy rushed him again, this time with full resolve. But he didn't repeat the tiger move. Instead, he started busting out animal-based moves, grabbing whatever he thought would hurt MU the most. Sometimes he moved like a cat, and the very next second he'd be biting MU's tongue like a dog. Then, fired up, he tried to smash a back kick into MU's face like a horse or a donkey. MU was starting to realize he just couldn't read this kid's next move because he'd never fought anyone who mixed the styles of so many four-legged animals all at once. For a moment, MU actually felt cornered. His opponent was completely unpredictable, but true to MU's nature, even in a situation like this, he started to feel a rush. He realized this was exactly what he'd always wanted. A real intense fight. And right then, MU's eyes fell on the dog standing next to him, the one that looked ready to go after Dragon Link again. In that instant, MU got it. If this guy kept copying four-legged animals like a dog, then maybe he shared their weakness too. And that weakness was the back of the neck, that line of the spine right behind the throat. MU had his strategy figured out on the spot. The Chinese boy came charging at him again with another wild attack. But when he saw MU glaring at him, he suddenly slowed down. Because MU had dropped to his knees like he was about to pull some trick, the Chinese boy had no idea MU was loading all his power into his legs. Every muscle was cranked to the max. The Chinese boy tried to rush in and stop him, but MU suddenly exploded upward like a kangaroo. He shot up so fast and so high that he completely disappeared from his opponent's field of vision. The crowd started screaming. People were recording, stunned. How could a human jump that high? Now the Chinese boy understood. He had to look up. But before he could react, MU came down, planting one foot on his head and slamming the other into his so hard that the boy stumbled all over the place. Now MU was smiling. He'd figured out how to deal with this kind of opponent, just attack from above, since all his other techniques were failing. The crowd went wild, but some folks were fuming. They'd put their cash on the Chinese kid and just watched it vanish. The moment MU dropped his opponent, he remembered. Oh right, my assistant is still fighting. When MU looked over there, he was shocked. The dog had given Dragon Link a proper beating, and now it was barking loudly at MU. Mew shot at a scary look, as if angrily asking, "You did this to my assistant?" And in that very moment, all the dog's attitude vanished. Terrified, it lay flat on the ground like it had gone into fake death mode. The dog's instincts were telling it, This human is way out of my league. And right then, the announcer girl declared the winner, Mew. She also announced that the Chinese boy's stomach now belonged to Mew. The audience started cheering for Mew again. Everything was settled now, except for one thing. Mew wanted to leave his mark on the opponent who had given him such a tough time. But the people standing there warned him, saying, "Don't do it. It's forbidden, and everything is being live-streamed." For once, don't go looking for unnecessary trouble. Mew listened to them and let the announcer carry on with the remaining matches. By then, 4 winners had already been decided. In the next hour, 2 more fights took place, and the champion with a 13-win streak reached the final after winning both. Now it was time for the 7th match, MU versus his new opponent, with the winner going straight to the final. The short announcer girl once again hyped both fighters up with full energy. On one side was MU, the 300-million-year fighter, and on the other was a professional boxer with tons of experience and victories. But everyone was stunned when it was revealed that this opponent was none other than Chio, the same Chio MU had brutally defeated last time. The marks from that fight were still visible on Chio's hands and ears. He still wasn't fully healed, and in that condition, standing in front of MU again was probably his very last option. On the other side was MU, who's a bit slow with these things. He didn't recognize Chio at first, but after staring for a while, MU finally remembered. Unlike Shaw, MU actually got excited. Like a kid overjoyed to get his favorite toy back, he thought, "Nice, I've got another chance to beat up this tough guy." Chol remembered the pain from last time, but this time, he decided he wouldn't let his guard down. Both of them stepped forward together, ready for the rematch, when the girl in charge of the fight shouted loudly. She yelled for the fight to start, and at the same time, asked who would be the one to defeat their undefeated champion. The moment she said it, MU and Chul both threw their punches without even a second's delay, locking eyes without blinking, like each one wanted to prove he had more power. Their fists crashed together, testing each other's strength. Chul's arm still hadn't fully healed. Or maybe he was just faking it, but he used that same arm to punch MU, and to MU's surprise, he felt a sharp pain in his own hand. MU instantly yanked his hand back. His fingers had seized up from the pain, while Chul didn't seem affected at all. Chul looked relieved, like he'd finally made MU share his suffering. After all, it was because of MU that his arm had ended up in a cast in the first place. MU tried to steady himself, but the pain was so intense that it would have been hard for anyone to endure. But MU wasn't just anyone. He turned that pain into a reminder. "I'm alive, and this is the reason I came to Earth." A twisted, intense expression spread across his face, and in the middle of that blazing emotion, MU completely shocked Chul. MU's reaction was also a signal, a warning to Chul not to take him lightly. Chul immediately came up with a solid plan. Distract MU with a jab, then rush in and finish the match with a clean, heavy kick. By then, MU would have cooled down and finally be able to defend himself properly. Chul figured MU still saw him only as a boxer, so he wouldn't be expecting a kick. He treated it as his trump card, but MU had already seen through it. Seeing how Chul's leg muscles bunched, he knew the next move would be a kick. Sure, he'd already won. Chul started running his mouth at MU while his leg was still hanging in the air. He had no clue that MU had not only read the kick, but had already lined up a counter. In a flash, MU slammed his fist into Chul's vital point. This was the move Kang had taught him. And now, for the first time, MU finally had a real chance to let it loose. Just like last time with MU, Chul's body spun 90 degrees in midair. That was the first part of the technique. The second part was a vicious strike to the face that came right after the initial punch. MU executed it perfectly, just like with the ear, catching Chul completely off guard. Chul couldn't withstand the force of that blow. He collapsed straight to the floor and blacked out. Without warning, MU leaped on top of him. It wasn't anything romantic. He tore off another piece of Chul's ear, completely ignoring everyone's earlier warnings. He did it while the boy who used to talk back to Lee and was now standing silently in the crowd was the one who was the most terrified. Watching MU in that moment, he knew exactly what MU was capable of. No one had the guts to stop MU, And eventually that moment just passed. Now it was time for the final match against the store girl with the 13-fight winning streak. MU was fired up to the max. This was the moment he'd been waiting for ever since he'd been kept away from MU. As the seconds slipped by, his whole body started to shake with excitement. The short girl had barely opened her mouth when Mew lunged in early to snag the advantage, but she was already ready. She drove a solid kick straight into Mew's face. Mew was stunned. It did, but he managed to protect his head. Still, her speed really impressed him. The fight kicked off again, and honestly, it was starting to look like a one-sided A1 beatdown. The girl just kept spamming kicks, and jab marnajadi to wool har bar rock dita, surf dodge r block p, hi charatha. There was no real opening. After a brief pause, Muck steadied his breathing and decided to change his strategy. He knew Ghidorah girls are tough, but he had to win. That's when he got the idea to try something completely unexpected. Muck made that same stupid face he'd used in that gang fight. The girl looked kinda shaken. She thought Mook had gotten hurt and that the fight might be ending right there. Seeing her hesitate, he lunged in with that same stupid face still on. But just as he closed in, she fired another kick right into his face. Muck instantly switched to his backup plan. He channeled all his strength into his leg and whipped a spinning kick toward her face.